On this day in the heart of the royal capital, a grand celebration is taking place, and every gaze is drawn forward as if a divine being has appeared before the people. The citizens gather in excitement to welcome the one who is destined to marry the crown prince, a girl who is only 14 years old. The entire city is captivated and consumed by admiration for everything about her. She is known as Ceres, the flawless younger sister of Lyle Walt, and her presence alone is enough to overwhelm the crowd. Ceres now stands before the people and conveys that there are those who claim her ascension as crown princess will bring about war. In response, the citizens demand the death of those who oppose her. Ceres feels genuine pleasure at this reaction, as she clearly perceives that nothing brings greater happiness to the people than being ruled by her. She further declares that anyone incapable of understanding this truth deserves death. She extends this belief beyond her own nation, asserting that countries refusing to submit should be treated in the same manner, and that resistance must be answered with execution. The people readily affirm her words without hesitation. Ceres goes even further, asserting that those she kills are fortunate souls, chosen to die by her hand. Meanwhile, Lyle senses that Ceres has lost her sanity, because her actions no longer concern herself alone. In his view, she has already dragged the entire nation into a dangerous path. 1 year before Ceres becomes the crown princess, she expresses her desire to compete with her older brother for the position of head of the Walt family. At that time, she presents this request while holding a rapier she receives on her 13th birthday, and Lyle's parents accept her challenge with visible enthusiasm. Lyle is taken by surprise and immediately prepares himself, gripping his own sword. In the past, Lyle is praised as a prodigy, a gifted and miraculous child who is deemed worthy of inheriting the Walt family. This reputation lasts until the moment his younger sister surpasses him in every possible field. Ceres openly acknowledges the situation, pointing out that Lyle trains with his sword every day in a foolish manner, yet still fails to rival a girl who is only 13 years old. As a man born into the Walt family, a lineage that has endured for 250 years, Lyle finds this reality almost impossible to accept. Their father openly praises Ceres while condemning Lyle as a son with a pitiful appearance, declaring that such a presence brings shame when facing the ancestors of the Walt family. Not long after, he decides that Lyle is no longer a member of the Walt family and expresses regret for ever acknowledging him as his son. Lyle's mother shares the same sentiment, questioning why such an incompetent child is even born. She believes that Lyle has already received sufficient education, yet everything still ends in failure. In her heart, she realizes that all the time and effort spent raising him are meaningless. In the end, both parents determine that the rightful successor of the Walt family is Ceres. These decisions and judgments cut deeply into Lyle's heart. Since the age of 8, Ceres consistently surpasses him in every aspect, and even after 5 more years pass, nothing changes. Their father permits this serious contest because he already understands that, given Lyle's abilities, there is no possibility for him to stand against Ceres. Lyle now understands more clearly than anyone else that ever since their parents recognized Ceres' talent 5 years ago, he no longer receives a single word of praise. Even the servants and subordinates begin to treat him with open contempt, to the point that no one truly acknowledges his existence anymore. Because of this, Lyle accepts Ceres' challenge once again, believing that this is the only way he can still be seen as a member of the Walt family. To Lyle, this matter is far from over. He launches another attack towards Ceres, an action that surprises their parents. However, Ceres evades the strike with ease, maintaining a relaxed expression. Her movements convey that no matter how many times Lyle attacks, the outcome never changes. She immediately counterattacks and slices into Lyle's thigh, a strike so swift that Lyle does not even perceive it clearly. Ceres appears curious about where she should attack next, treating the exchange with casual interest. Lyle continues his assault, but Ceres avoids it effortlessly. When she retaliates, Lyle barely manages to block the blow, breathing heavily as he does so. He feels that Ceres' movements are overwhelmingly fast. Her attacks leave numerous wounds across his body, and she does not slow down, striking him repeatedly with motions that resemble a graceful dance. None of the wounds are fatal, and Lyle realizes that Ceres is deliberately avoiding killing him, treating the entire fight as nothing more than amusement. Ceres herself finds great pleasure in breaking her older brother down, regarding the battle as no different from striking a lifeless scarecrow. She wonders how much longer Lyle can continue to entertain her. She then releases fire-based magic in the form of compressed projectiles, while Lyle hastily erects a defensive barrier using ice magic. The fire projectiles crash violently into his ice wall. Lyle feels that the force far exceeds what such magic should normally produce, as if he is being struck by solid stone rather than flames. Ceres mocks his fragile defense, while quietly measuring how long he can endure. She proceeds to create 5 fire projectiles at once, leaving Lyle questioning the source of such overwhelming power. He reinforces his ice wall again and briefly considers whether Ceres is using some form of physical enhancement technique. The sheer number and intensity of the incoming attacks push him to his limit, and he struggles for breath as he desperately maintains his defense. Suddenly, Ceres appears behind him without warning. Lyle is struck by shock, while Ceres regards him as utterly insignificant. She punches his cheek, sending him crashing to the ground, and immediately follows with a sword strike. Lyle forces himself to rise and barely manages to intercept her blade. Even so, he fails to block the next attack in time, and her sword cuts into him. His ice wall shatters, and the remaining fire projectiles strike his body directly, leaving him severely wounded. In that moment, Lyle recognizes just how vast the difference between them truly is. He fights using everything he has, pushing his abilities to their absolute limit. Yet Ceres shows no sign of fatigue at all, not even a single drop of sweat forming on her body. Lyle feels that over the past 5 years, he continuously swings the sword in his hands thousands, even tens of thousands of times, repeating the same motion day after day. Despite all that effort, he still fails to rival Ceres, who now wields a rapier for the very first time today. The gap between them becomes painfully clear. To Ceres, Lyle is utterly worthless, and she openly regards him as such. She recognizes that she has already possessed 3 separate opportunities to end his life during this confrontation, and considers it disappointing that he cannot perform even slightly better than this. Lyle struggles to understand why Ceres chooses to treat him this way. He begins to believe that she must hate him deeply. For a long time, he takes care of her, protects her, and even admires her with genuine devotion. Yet he cannot grasp why everything turns out like this, and he wonders if he makes a mistake somewhere without ever realizing it. In truth, Ceres harbors an intense hatred toward Lyle, greater than toward anyone else in the world. However, even she no longer remembers the original reason for that hatred, and she does not care to recall it. To her, Lyle's existence itself is unnecessary, and she wants him to disappear entirely. Ceres launches another attack with clear intent to kill, while Lyle clings to a desperate hope that he can strike her at least once. He narrowly avoids her blow and closes the distance, swinging his sword at close range. Ceres evades again with ease, and Lyle realizes that even when he attacks with everything he has, his blade still cannot reach her. Refusing to give up, he steps forward once more and swings again. This time, Ceres evades as usual, but the trajectory of Lyle's sword subtly shifts, grazing her thigh and tearing part of her skirt. The strike barely causes damage, yet Lyle feels a brief surge of relief simply because his attack connects at all. Ceres falls silent for a moment before her fury erupts. She now regards Lyle with pure contempt and no longer sees him as merely incompetent. In her view, she allows him to live out of mercy, yet he dares to become overly enthusiastic and actually touch her. This enrages her to the point that she wants to burn him into ashes. Lyle senses the danger immediately. Ceres unleashes a devastating firestorm, while Lyle hastily constructs an ice wall to defend himself. Those who witness the scene are astonished by the sheer scale and power of Ceres' magic. After some time passes, however, they realize that Lyle's ice wall remains standing, stubbornly intact despite the assault. Once the firestorm subsides, Lyle manages to survive, but his mana is nearly depleted. Exhaustion overwhelms his body, and he begins to wonder if everything ends here. His strength fades, his vision blurs, and he feels himself wavering as he questions the very reason for his birth. In his weakened state, Lyle plants his sword into the ground and kneels before Ceres. When she moves to touch the sword, he instinctively tries to stop her. In response, she steps on his foot and treats the weapon with scorn, pointing out that while the sword is supposedly his treasured possession, it is already shattered beyond repair. She questions whether such an object still holds any value for him. Ceres forcibly pulls the sword from the ground and throws it aside, deciding that Lyle no longer has any need for it. She then destroys it completely using her own blade. To her, a man of the Walt family should wield a weapon of far higher quality. As Lau watches the remains of his sword, memories surface. That sword is given to him by his father when he is still a child, back when his parents shower him with affection. His father tells him that in a few years, the time will come for him to venture out and face monsters, fulfilling his noble duty. He also urges Lyle to refine himself so that he may become worthy of the excellence embodied by his sword. Now, standing defeated and unable to win, those words feel meaningless. Lyle realizes that no matter how hard he tries, he is never acknowledged. His father declares that from the very beginning, Ceres is an only child in his heart, and that he never truly considers having a son other than her. Meanwhile, his mother shows concern only for Ceres' torn dress, thinking about buying a new one for her. These realizations pierce deeply into Lyle's heart. He feels overwhelming sorrow and bitterness, questioning whether his existence has always been a burden to his family and whether they would truly feel happier if he disappears. As his consciousness fades, Lyle senses that death may be close. His strength finally gives out, and he collapses into darkness. In his fading awareness, he faintly hears voices speaking about him. He cannot see who they belong to, yet they refer to him as their relative and as part of their lineage. Trapped in the depths of despair, Lyle encounters these unseen figures as his consciousness drifts away. Within the luxurious residence of the Fuchs family, news spreads that Lord Lyle has been stripped of his right to inherit and expelled from his home. Alongside this, an official announcement confirms that Lord Lyle's engagement to the daughter of the Fuchs family has been annulled. Upon hearing this report, the young woman immediately resolves to depart and seek out Lord Lyle. The man who delivers the news observes that such events do not unsettle her in the slightest. She has always been like this since childhood, reacting calmly as though she has anticipated the situation long before it unfolds. That man entrusts her with the ancestral staff of the Fuchs family and asks her to carry it with her. He understands that if she brings such an object, the Fuchs family can justify their position with many explanations, as the Walt family is already suspicious of their support. The young woman points out that serious trouble will arise if it is revealed that her father has assisted in any way, and she believes it is more than sufficient for him to simply turn a blind eye to her actions. Her father, however, explains that if she chooses to follow Lord Lyle, the Walt family will inevitably suspect him regardless of the circumstances. Because of this, he asks for her permission to escort her while providing this item. He also states that one day, the girl named Novum may stand against him as an enemy. Even then, he is confident that she will not shed a single tear, because she is a daughter who fully inherits his name and resolve. Meanwhile, Lyle awakens with a burning sensation coursing through his body. He notices layers of bandages covering him from head to toe and realizes that he is lying inside an unfamiliar house. Confusion fills his mind as he wonders where he has been brought. Soon after, someone enters the room and notices that Lyle has regained consciousness. Lyle recognizes the person as Grandpa Zell. Grandpa Zell explains that Lyle has been unconscious for 3 days, a fact that causes him great concern. He fears that Lyle may slip away permanently and reflects that if a proper physician from the household had been present, Lyle would have recovered much faster. Lyle expresses his gratitude, yet he is painfully aware that he has nothing to offer in return. He is no longer a noble, and his former status has completely vanished. Grandpa Zell is a gardener who has worked and lived in this household since the time of Lyle's grandfather. Speaking from long years of experience, Grandpa Zell describes how the atmosphere of the mansion has grown unsettling to his aging eyes. He cannot help but wonder what has caused such a drastic change. He recounts that whenever the servants speak, their conversations revolve solely around the young lady of the house. No one ever questions the cold treatment directed toward the young master. The head of the household has also officially named the young lady as the sole heir. Grandpa Zell reflects that if Lyle's grandfather or the previous master of the house were to hear this, the fury they would feel is unimaginable, especially considering how strict and principled Lyle's grandfather is. In the past, when Lyle's grandfather Broadwalt is still active, he serves as an advisor to King Bansium and earns a reputation as a highly influential noble. Lyle has also heard that his own father feels uneasy whenever he is near Broadwalt. However, to Lyle himself, Broad is nothing more than a kind and affectionate grandfather. Broad places great expectations upon him, yet despite all of that, Lyle has now been expelled from the line of inheritance. Lyle believes that his grandfather would be angry with him for betraying those expectations. He even imagines that Broad may have already given up on such a disappointing grandchild. Grandpa Zell urges Lyle not to burden himself with excessive self-blame, expressing firm belief that Broad would understand the hardships Lyle endures. He is convinced that if Broad were still alive, he would stand firmly by Lyle's side and protect him without hesitation. Lyle can only hope that this belief is true. No matter how much he wishes otherwise, Broad is no longer present, and Lyle is left alone with uncertainty, unable to see a clear path forward or decide what he should do next. At night, Lyle awakens and notices Grandpa Zell asleep in a chair nearby. In that quiet moment, he realizes how long it takes him to truly understand the weight of the burden he has placed on the old man. This realization fills him with frustration toward himself. He feels ashamed of his own existence and comes to see himself as nothing more than an irritating nuisance, someone whose presence only causes trouble for others. As his thoughts spiral, faint voices echo within his consciousness. One voice describes Lyle as deeply pitiful, yet urges him to remain strong. Another voice questions whether Lyle can truly be considered its descendant, expressing confusion over how someone like him could be connected to them at all. A different voice intervenes, asking the others to calm down because Lyle is clearly suffering. The voice that had questioned him earlier insists that it only intends to offer a small measure of encouragement. Eventually, another presence suggests postponing any further involvement until Lyle fully recovers. After that, the voices fall silent, leaving the room once again wrapped in stillness. By morning, Lyle shares a simple breakfast with Grandpa Zell. The old man briefly worries that the meal may not suit Lyle's taste, but Lyle finds the food satisfying, especially the boiled meat. His reaction brings a gentle laugh from Grandpa Zell, who expresses genuine happiness at receiving such praise. The atmosphere is calm and warm, offering Lyle a rare sense of comfort. Afterward, Lyle brings up a matter he has been carefully considering. He explains that he is thinking about becoming an adventurer. At first, Grandpa Zell is taken aback by this idea. Lyle clarifies that his desire is to start anew. Becoming an adventurer is not something he truly longs for, but it is the only realistic path that allows him to stand on his own. He also notices that Grandpa Zell has been using many expensive medicines on his behalf, and now that his body is nearly healed, Lyle feels increasingly uneasy about continuing to rely on him. Moreover, Lyle believes that remaining hidden in the small hut at the corner of the mansion's grounds is dangerous. If Ceres were to discover him there, he can easily imagine disastrous consequences. Wanting to avoid bringing further trouble to Grandpa Zell, Lyle resolves to leave as soon as possible. Grandpa Zell remarks that if Broad were to hear about this plan, he might faint in shock, since Broad has never held a favorable view of adventurers. This revelation surprises Lyle. Grandpa Zell goes on to explain that such feelings stem from various incidents in the past. Even so, because he knows Lyle well, he trusts that Lyle will act with sound judgment despite choosing this path. Lyle agrees and reflects that if he can rise to become a high-ranking adventurer, he could earn hundreds of gold coins from a single mission. He firmly intends to repay Grandpa Zell's kindness when the time comes. Hearing this, Grandpa Zell feels pleased and says he will patiently wait for that day. Lyle feels genuine happiness from being able to speak so openly with him, and he quietly wishes that they could have grown closer much earlier. Grandpa Zell then suggests that Lyle head toward the main adventurer's headquarters located in the free city of Bame. Lyle confirms that this refers to Bame, the trade city without a ruler. He recalls that Bame is a massive city that has grown into a central hub for commerce among foreign nations. It is a place where immense wealth gathers, but also a place filled with danger, as many unsavory individuals are drawn to such riches. To Lyle, Bame feels far too overwhelming for someone at a beginner's level, especially since it serves as a center for far more experienced adventurers and merchants. Grandpa Zell agrees with this assessment and proposes other alternatives. Not far from Bame lies a well-known academic city called Aramthurst. There is also a border city named Oren, an area marked by frequent small-scale battles and a location that is particularly popular among mercenaries. Lyle considers these options carefully and realizes that among the three, Oren is the closest. With that in mind, Lyle decides that he will begin his journey as an adventurer in the city of Oren. Grandpa Zell cautions him against acting recklessly, noting that stories of young, overly enthusiastic adventurers meeting tragic ends are countless. Lyle reassures him, expressing his determination to proceed carefully and to give his utmost effort. He resolves to live step by step through his own strength, without relying on others. Hearing this, Grandpa Zell comes to understand Lyle's resolve and accepts his decision, quietly supporting him as he prepares to walk a new and uncertain path. After that, Grandpa Zell asks whether, during his stay in the house, Lyle experiences anything strange or unsettling. Lyle explains that lately he often dreams of the same voices calling out to him. Those voices shout that they are already close, while others attempt to encourage him, even as they describe him as a pitiful man. Most importantly, the voices regard Lyle as their descendant. Hearing this, Grandpa Zell is genuinely shocked. Lyle feels disturbed by these voices and wonders whether they belong to his ancestors, even suspecting that he may have been cursed. Grandpa Zell responds with firm conviction, expressing that this assumption is likely true. The certainty in his response leaves Lyle stunned. Seeing Lyle's reaction, Grandpa Zell smiles gently and advises him to rest, noting that it is already late at night. He also observes that Lyle looks noticeably healthier now. The tension eases, and they share a brief moment of laughter. The next day, Lyle finishes preparing himself and puts on a set of clothes. The size does not matter much to him, and Grandpa Zell also sees that the outfit suits Lyle well. Grandpa Zell explains that these clothes once belonged to his own son, yet he feels glad that they now fit Lyle properly. He then hands Lyle a small pouch filled with gold coins. Lyle immediately feels unworthy of accepting such a thing. Grandpa Zell explains that without money, Lyle will not be able to succeed at all. If Lyle truly intends to return it someday, he suggests treating it as an investment for now and asks for Lyle's thoughts. Lyle swallows hard and decides to regard the money as a loan. Hearing this, Grandpa Zell is pleased. Lyle reflects that Grandpa Zell has taken care of him without ever asking for anything in return, and he resolves to repay this debt tenfold in the future. Grandpa Zell replies that Lyle's feelings alone are already more than enough. He also feels relieved, believing that he has finally fulfilled a promise he once makes to Broad and erased a regret that has haunted him for years. Curious about this promise, Lyle asks further, and Grandpa Zell then reveals an item he has kept hidden. At first glance, Lyle wonders whether it is a piece of jewelry. Grandpa Zell explains that this object is something Broad entrusts to him, and that it is an heirloom meant to be passed on to Lyle. The moment Lyle looks at it closely, he realizes it is not merely an ornament, but a true gemstone. Grandpa Zell confirms this, explaining that the gem is a manufactured magical artifact whose method of creation is long lost to time. It has been passed down through the successive heads of the Walt family ever since the family's founding. Grandpa Zell further explains that a person can normally manifest only a single blessing from the goddess, yet this artifact is capable of recording complete manifestations. Through it, one can study various arts. However, as technology advances and basic arts are carved into tools for demons, the gemstone comes to be regarded as outdated. Broad once wishes for the object to be decorated in a manner befitting his position. Crafted from several rare metals by a first-rate artisan, it is turned into an accessory. Not long after that, Broad passes away. Grandpa Zell mentions that he brings this matter up several times with Lyle's father, but by then, Lyle's father has already changed. His attention is entirely focused on the young lady of the house, making everything feel as though everyone has lost their reason. Lyle asks whether Grandpa Zell has been safeguarding the gemstone all this time. Grandpa Zell confirms this and earnestly asks Lyle to take it with him, believing that this is what Lyle's ancestors truly desire. Lyle understands and places the gemstone around his neck as a necklace. He resolves to protect this Walt family heirloom with his life. As he prepares to depart, Lyle swears that he will return one day and asks Grandpa Zell to allow him to repay all the kindness he has received. Grandpa Zell smiles warmly and says that he looks forward to that day. At last, the heavy burden Grandpa Zell has carried for many years is lifted, and Lyle sets out on his journey. Although Grandpa Zell still finds Lyle somewhat unreliable, he believes that Lyle will be fine. He offers a silent prayer to the ancestors of the Walt family, asking them to watch over Lyle. After leaving, Lyle encounters a carriage driver traveling with a wagon and intends to hitch a ride. The driver agrees to take him to the next city as long as Lyle is willing to pay. When Lyle attempts to do so, the driver instead proposes waiving the fee if Lyle proves himself to be a capable warrior and serves as a guard, referring to Lyle as an unarmed soldier. Lyle demonstrates his magic, and this completely changes the driver's attitude. Impressed, the driver immediately allows Lyle to board. Lyle expresses his gratitude. The driver then notices a young woman standing behind Lyle and assumes she is his lover, even suspecting that they may be running away together. Lyle turns around and sees the girl, who readily affirms the assumption and identifies herself as his fiancée. The girl is Novum. Lyle sees her standing there with the bearing of someone prepared to set out on a journey. With quiet resolve, Novum asks for permission to accompany Lyle on his path forward. As a child, Lyle once thinks that Novum is deeply unfortunate, believing that she is forced to become a failure just like him. He even urges her to leave him behind. Novum, however, is Lyle's childhood friend, and they have known each other since the age of 5. By the time they reach 13, Novum officially becomes Lyle's fiancée. To Lyle, Novum is someone who always greets him with a gentle smile, even though he consistently treats her with cold distance. Now Lyle and Novum arrive at the outer regions on the edge of the territory. While riding in the horse-drawn carriage, Lyle wonders why Novum is here. Novum makes it clear that remaining by Lyle's side is her duty. Lyle reacts with irritation and explains that he has been expelled from his home and that their official engagement has already been annulled, insisting that Novum should return. Novum refuses, holding firmly to her desire to stay with him, emphasizing that this choice comes from her own will. The carriage driver casually remarks on the nature of youth, which only deepens Lyle's frustration, prompting him to demand that the driver stop listening in. Lyle also directs his irritation toward Novum, claiming that her presence only makes things more difficult for him. Lyle presses further, questioning whether Novum truly understands his situation. He emphasizes that he has been cast out, stripped of status, honor, and wealth, and that he now possesses nothing at all. Despite this, Novum remains unwavering in her decision to follow him. Although Lyle feels a quiet sense of relief at her resolve, he cannot help but wonder whether this is truly the moment for her to be so steadfast. Lyle apologizes to Novum and admits that he has no interest in her and does not wish to pursue a relationship. He openly states that he has no intention of being faithful, as he plans to live freely as an adventurer, indulging himself without restraint. He also declares that being expelled from that oppressive place brings him a sense of relief, as he has already intended to leave behind that life. Even so, Novum responds with a calm smile, accepting everything as a consequence of her own decision. She seeks permission to follow Lyle and accompany him on his journey, even without the title of wife. This leaves Lyle stunned. He begins to worry about what will happen to Novum's household, certain that her parents will be devastated. Novum explains that such concerns are unnecessary, as her older brother will succeed the family. She further recounts that when she informs her father of her intention to follow Lyle, her father stubbornly insists on giving her an inheritance anyway. Lyle finds the way Novum's father thinks difficult to understand. He even concludes that Novum's parents are foolish, especially since her father entrusts her with the family heirloom. At that point, Lyle feels defeated in the argument and concedes that everything is ultimately Novum's choice. Novum affirms her determination to go through with it. A voice audible only to Lyle remarks that Novum is a deeply cherished child, dismissing her as spoiled. Shortly after, Lyle realizes that the carriage driver is listening again and sharply warns him not to interfere. The driver responds defensively, claiming he has done nothing at all. Lyle then wonders whether Novum hears the strange voice he just hears, one that carries a teasing tone. Novum looks confused, unable to perceive anything unusual. Lyle concludes that he must be more exhausted than he realizes. Novum checks on Lyle's condition, and Lyle responds that he is probably fine, asking her not to worry about him. Deep down, he knows that his injuries have not fully healed yet. Soon after, the voices return once more. One expresses jealousy that Lyle already has a fiancée, while another cannot comprehend why Novum is so devoted to him. Overwhelmed, Lyle suddenly shouts for the voices to stop, startled by their return. He turns to Novum again, but she hears nothing and simply asks whether something is wrong. Confusion overtakes Lyle. He begins to fear that he is losing his sanity, yet he cannot bring himself to explain any of this to her. They soon arrive at an inn, only to learn that a single room remains available. The receptionist explains that this time of year always brings an influx of guests, making vacancies rare. If sharing a room is an issue, the receptionist suggests looking for another inn, while also urging them to decide quickly since other customers may claim the last room at any moment. Novum shows no concern about the situation and accepts it without hesitation. The receptionist further explains that the inn provides breakfast only. For dinner, a nearby pub is recommended, known for good food at reasonable prices. Novum readily agrees to this suggestion, and the receptionist expresses appreciation, noting that such cooperation is helpful for the inn as well. Lyle feels puzzled by the receptionist's remark, unable to grasp its deeper implication. Later, while heading to the pub for dinner, Lyle wonders why Novum insists on carrying their belongings with them even though their room is already locked. Novum reassures him that he does not need to worry, as she will take care of all the small details herself. At that moment, the familiar voices resurface, expressing concern that Lyle understands very little about how the world works. Lyle becomes aware of them immediately. One of the voices insists that Lyle is a noble by birth and even a potential prince, implying that ignorance of mundane matters is hardly a serious flaw. Another voice harshly dismisses this notion, claiming that even a fool can possess a title. Lyle grows confused, disturbed by how much these voices seem to know about him. He begins to wonder just how many of them are residing within his mind. Novum notices that Lyle's face has gone pale and checks on his condition. Lyle reassures her that he is fine and asks her not to worry, convinced that the voices exist only within his own head. Even so, he continues to question whether something is fundamentally wrong with his thoughts. At the pub, Novum prompts Lyle to order food. When he looks over the menu, he finds himself uncertain and hesitant. Seeing this, Novum speaks directly with the server, confirming that the daily special is still available. The server also offers drinks, which Novum accepts. She orders 2 portions of the daily special along with hot tea to be enjoyed after the meal. Throughout this exchange, Lyle remains silent. Novum explains that the daily special features chicken today, something she considers well worth anticipating, and Lyle finds himself agreeing. Before he can relax, the voices return once more. They mock Lyle, calling him pitiful and suggesting that Novum stays only because she is exceptionally understanding, insisting that any ordinary girl would have already left. One voice sneers that this is what an heir to a noble family truly looks like. Another finds the situation so dreadful that it cannot even laugh, describing it as horrifying. Amid the ridicule, one voice speaks in Lyle's defense, arguing that the others misunderstand him and reminding them that he is only 15 years old. The constant murmuring and ridicule begin to weigh heavily on Lyle's mind. The lone voice defending him stands out as the only source of relief, yet it is quickly drowned out as the insults continue without pause. Dinner feels interminable. Lyle can barely register the taste of the food before him, and by the time the meal ends, exhaustion has fully overtaken him, leaving both his body and mind utterly drained. After entering their room at the inn, Novum asks for permission to fetch hot water for them. Only then does Lyle notice that she is carrying a bucket filled with water, which leads him to realize something is unusual. He wonders whether the inn lacks a proper bathroom. Novum explains that this inn does not have one. Most inns only provide hot water for sponge bathing, while those that do have bathing facilities usually offer large communal baths shared among all guests. She adds that inns with private bathing rooms are extremely expensive, often costing several silver coins per night. As she explains this, Novum begins gently washing Lyle's back. Lyle mentions that he does have silver coins and expresses regret, thinking that bathing like this must be inconvenient for her. Novum disagrees and calmly explains that such thinking is unwise. From now on, neither of them knows what kind of future awaits them. To her, money is a precious resource that will become increasingly important, and she insists that they should save as much as possible. Otherwise, their funds will disappear before they even realize it. After that, she carefully washes Lyle's hair. Only then does Lyle fully grasp the reality of their situation, and Novum confirms his understanding without hesitation. Once she finishes helping him, Lyle expresses his gratitude. Shortly afterward, one of the familiar voices advises him to wait outside after he is done. While Lyle is putting his clothes back on, Novum mentions that she will wash his undergarments and bring them to him once they are dry. Lyle shows no particular reaction to this. In response, one of the voices criticizes him harshly, calling him oblivious. Another voice urgently points out that Novum cannot wash herself properly while Lyle remains in the room and demands that he leave immediately. Only then does Lyle finally understand the situation. Realizing his oversight, he decides to wait outside the room. Novum visibly relaxes once he does so. Standing alone in the hallway, Lyle begins to question what is truly happening to him. The voices constantly insult him, yet at the same time offer guidance and warnings. Because of this contradiction, he starts to believe that he may truly be under some kind of curse. As Novum bathes inside the room, Lyle reflects on the fact that these voices are the same ones he hears earlier at Zell's house. That realization convinces him that this cannot simply be a dream. One of the voices reacts with relief, acknowledging that Lyle finally understands the situation. Without warning, Lyle's surroundings abruptly change. He finds himself drawn into a strange space containing 7 chairs arranged around a single round table at the center. Confusion overtakes him as he tries to comprehend where he is. One of the voices complains that Lyle is far too noisy. In the next instant, 6 figures suddenly appear, each seated in one of the chairs. Lyle is taken completely by surprise. Just moments ago, he is alone in the hallway of an inn, and now 6 people appear before him without explanation. One of them remarks again that Lyle is excessively loud. Lyle cannot make sense of what is happening. The transition is too sudden, and the memory of being at the inn feels far too recent. As he looks around this unfamiliar room, doubt fills his mind. He begins to wonder whether this scene is real or merely another illusion created by his fractured consciousness. Lyle is summoned by a mysterious man, and in the center of the strange room, he is harshly scolded. When Lyle instinctively turns around, the man points out that there is no one behind him and accuses Lyle of acting foolishly. The man then lays out Lyle's current condition in detail. He describes how Lyle is brutally beaten by his own younger sister until he nearly dies, only to be cast out of his home afterward. As if that were not enough, the man adds that Lyle further disgraces himself by being unable to do anything on his own and instead relying entirely on a woman to take care of him. To this man, Lyle's behavior is utterly shameful for someone who bears his blood. Hearing this, Lyle begins to question whether he truly is a descendant of this man. Rather than answering directly, the man criticizes Lyle for failing to grasp implied meanings and demands that Lyle reflect on what kind of education he has actually received. Before Lyle can fully process this, Broad Walt suddenly appears near him. Lyle immediately realizes that this man is his grandfather, although Broad looks far younger than Lyle remembers. Broad explains that everyone gathered in this place appears as they did during their prime. While Lyle is still overwhelmed by confusion, Broad forcefully confronts the men seated around the round table and questions whether they truly have a problem with his grandson. The man who earlier berates Lyle responds that this very issue is the reason they summon him here, as they all wish to voice their dissatisfaction with Lyle. Lyle's thoughts spiral as he struggles to understand what is happening, where he is, and whether this place could possibly be the afterlife. He briefly suspects that he has already died, and that his ancestors are now expressing their anger toward him. At that moment, a man wearing glasses steps in to calm Lyle. He assures him that he is not dead and states that an explanation will be given, though it will take time. To ease Lyle's confusion, he suggests that everyone begin with proper introductions. He then asks the man who first scolds Lyle to introduce himself. That man identifies himself as Basil Walt, a noble who establishes the Walt family and serves as its founding patriarch and first-generation head. Next comes Crassel Walt, who openly shows frustration toward Basil and introduces himself as the second-generation head of the family. After him, Slay Walt steps forward as the third-generation leader of the Walt family. The man with glasses then introduces himself as Marcus Walt, the fourth-generation head and the son of Slay Walt. Following this lineage, Fredericks Walt is acknowledged as the fifth-generation head, whose son, Fiennes Walt, carries on the family line. Finally, the sixth-generation head is revealed to be Broad Walt, Lyle's own grandfather. Broad then addresses the question that he knows Lyle is struggling with and explains the nature of the round table room itself. He reveals that this space is not an ordinary room, but the interior of a gemstone that Lyle previously receives from Zell. At this very moment, all of them are inside that gemstone. Upon hearing this explanation, Lyle finally connects the pieces. He realizes that the gem he has been carrying all along is the core of everything he is now experiencing. Slay states that Lyle already understands the situation, then clarifies that all of them are, in fact, the true identities behind the voices that Lyle believes to be auditory hallucinations. Lyle reflects that the voices indeed feel extremely familiar to him. Basil grows irritated and accuses Broad of ruining Lyle's upbringing. In response, Broad, clearly displeased, questions what dissatisfaction Basil is actually directing toward Lyle. Basil proceeds to list his grievances in detail. He observes that Lyle looks stiff and lifeless, with a frail body and unnaturally pale skin, as if he rarely ever goes outside. Basil also points out that Lyle appears weak, emphasizing that he is beaten thoroughly by his own younger sister. Hearing this assessment, Lyle feels deeply hurt and shaken. Broad counters by arguing that Lyle's thin appearance is simply due to his young age, as he is only 15 and still in a period of growth. Basil dismisses this explanation, insisting that such details are irrelevant and that Lyle must begin changing immediately, especially since he has already been cast out. Crassel intervenes and urges Lyle not to pay attention to the exchange between Basil and Broad, proposing that the discussion should move forward. Crassel then voices his own stance, stating that he believes everyone should agree that a woman should not be allowed to inherit their family. In his view, women possess too many shortcomings, and regardless of how capable a girl might be, he would never permit such a succession. For Crassel, the noble society they belong to is fundamentally male-dominated. Slay follows by explaining his own background. He is the second child, yet due to particular circumstances, he becomes the heir. He also has a younger sister, but her name is never even mentioned when discussions of succession arise. From Slay's perspective, times have changed. If it is now considered normal for women to lead, then such a choice can be seen as reasonable. Fiennes adds that even in the present era, female heads of households are still uncommon, and it is generally assumed that a son will inherit leadership. Fiennes then attempts to set aside the issue of Ceres being named heir. What troubles him most is the idea of choosing a daughter as successor solely because she wins a duel. In a sudden and forceful gesture, Fiennes grips Broad's head and questions whether Broad truly educates his child properly, insisting that no sane person would make such a decision. Broad pleads with Fiennes to preserve his dignity in front of his grandson, Lyle, who witnesses this scene directly. As Lyle watches, he notices a strange, mysterious light behind Fiennes and comes to understand that his grandfather is the youngest among those gathered. Broad then attempts to explain the situation as he remembers it. He states that his son, Maisel, appears far more outstanding than his peers, and that there is nothing particularly abnormal about him. Broad also regards Ceres as an ordinary girl who simply receives an appropriate education befitting a young lady of high status. Marcus listens carefully and pieces everything together. From his analysis, it becomes clear that Ceres, despite her young age, is exceptionally talented and genuinely defeats Lyle through her own ability. In such a case, Marcus considers it entirely possible for the current headmaster to acknowledge Lyle's shortcomings and decide to appoint a replacement. Marcus then seeks Lyle's view on this conclusion. Lyle falls silent for a brief moment before admitting that he does not fully understand all the details and cannot say for certain what truly happens. Lyle proceeds to explain that Ceres appears perfect in every measurable aspect, including magic, academic learning, and swordsmanship. From Lyle's perspective, Ceres performs all of these effortlessly, yet what affects him the most is the presence she naturally radiates. Basil becomes confused by what Lyle means by this sense of presence and presses him to clarify so everyone can understand, questioning what perfect truly signifies to Lyle. Growing flustered, Lyle conveys that everyone around them is drawn to Ceres without exception. He then elaborates further, describing how his parents are not cold toward him at first, but when he reaches the age of 10, the atmosphere within the household begins to change. Gradually, his parents, the servants, and everyone else shift their attention entirely toward Ceres, treating her as the unquestioned center of everything. Slay summarizes Lyle's explanation, stating that everyone surrounding Lyle recognizes Ceres as someone with talent far surpassing his own. Slay also expresses interest in hearing more concrete details about Lyle's environment, believing that Broad hopes to see the emergence of the seventh head of the family. Broad responds by saying that Ceres feels adorable to him and that she is also his granddaughter. However, Broad insists that Ceres never openly displays her extraordinary talent, making Lyle's description seem inconsistent with his own observations. From Broad's point of view, Lyle himself appears exceptional, even when Broad consciously sets aside his bias as a grandfather. Lyle recalls that when Broad is still alive, everything remains peaceful. He also remembers that his relationship with Ceres is not initially this strained, which leads him to wonder when things truly begin to feel wrong. Frederick states that the turning point occurs when Ceres is around 7 or 8 years old. He speculates that a certain art may have manifested at that time. Basil agrees that such an abrupt change could indicate the manifestation of a charm-type art, or perhaps a form of hypnosis. Slay, however, disagrees, arguing that regardless of the type of art involved, mastery would still require time. Given the circumstances, Slay finds such an explanation unrealistic. Slay then shifts the focus to Lyle, stating that when it comes to manifested arts, Lyle himself has already awakened one, even though he remains unaware of it. Lyle becomes confused by this statement, and Slay realizes that Lyle truly understands nothing about his own condition. Lyle demands to know what kind of art he possesses. Basil remarks that only Lyle can ultimately recognize it, as it must be considered in relation to his bloodline. Slay continues by explaining that their family gem is blue, which generally makes it easier for members of the Walt family to manifest support-type arts. He adds that red gems store frontline arts, typically classified as close combat abilities, while yellow gems store vanguard-type techniques that make the use of magic easier. Crassel interjects that regardless of classification, Lyle's art continuously consumes mana. If Lyle is careless, he risks exhaustion and eventual loss of consciousness. At this point, Lyle realizes that his mana is being steadily drained, which explains why he feels increasingly lethargic in recent days. Basil adds that while this is one factor, the primary cause of Lyle's mana consumption is actually them. Lyle's mana is what sustains everything happening within this space. The realization shocks Lyle, and he reacts so strongly that he suddenly wakes up to find Novum in front of him. Novum explains that she finds Lyle collapsed in the hallway outside their room. Lyle assumes that he has merely fallen asleep, and that everything he experiences is nothing more than a dream. Novum suggests that Lyle should rest, believing that he is simply exhausted. Soon after, Basil's presence becomes apparent again, showing curiosity about Novum's family name. Fredericks provides the explanation, noting that Novum is the second daughter of the Fuchs family and that he never expects her to become Lyle's fiancée. Basil reacts with visible shock, which startles Lyle in turn. Basil recognizes the Fuchs family as nobles from a neighboring territory of the Walt family. Fredericks adds that the Fuchs family is promoted to become subordinate knights under the Walt family. Basil is stunned by the implication that the Walt family effectively resides under the roof of the Fuchs family. Fredericks urges Basil to calm down, pointing out that Basil is draining Lyle's mana at an excessive rate. Novum asks what is happening, and Lyle realizes that no one else can hear the voices he hears. He begins to suspect that he appears unstable from the outside. Lyle grips the gemstone hanging around his neck, and in that instant, the number of voices increases once more. At that moment, Lyle becomes certain that what he experiences is not a dream at all. Crassel calls out to the others and suggests that they establish some ground rules for the discussion. Since everyone gathered there is related as fathers and sons, he argues that the conversation will only grow more confusing if they do not first settle how they address one another. Basil bursts into laughter and casually asks everyone to call him Lord Basil instead. Crassel immediately tells his father to be quiet, only for Basil to retort by calling Crassel a foolish child. Sensing that things are about to escalate into a fight, Slay urges Marcus to think quickly and handle the situation, effectively dumping the responsibility onto him. Marcus is taken aback, protesting that Slay suddenly pushes everything onto him. Slay, however, insists that Marcus looks perfectly suited to act as a moderator, especially with those glasses of his. Marcus objects, stating that his glasses have nothing to do with this. Basil then deliberately refers to him as the one with glasses, prompting Marcus to beg Basil not to rename him like that. After regaining some composure, Marcus proposes a compromise. They should refer to one another by their respective generational titles. The suggestion is accepted by everyone. Marcus then turns to Lyle and says that he is pleased to finally meet him. Meanwhile, Lyle remains asleep, though his rest feels uneasy and disturbed. The next day, Lyle and Novum arrive in the city of Remorant. While walking through the city, Novum notices a monument dedicated to one of Remorant's wonders, a tribute honoring Bansamsley Walt, a member of the third generation of the Walt family. Novum recognizes the name immediately. At that moment, Slay suddenly appears in front of the monument and questions its meaning. Lyle flinches in surprise, which causes Novum to ask what is wrong. Lyle realizes once again that only he can see them, so he hastily makes an excuse, saying that he has just spotted an insect. Marcus then appears beside Slay and explains that Slay dies in a major battle, and that his achievements there lead directly to victory. As a result, the people come to revere him as a hero, and he is remembered as the man who brings a miracle to Remorant. Hearing this, Slay finally understands how he is remembered by history. He remarks that the war itself begins due to Bansium's mistakes, and because of that, he believes a monument like this should never have existed in the first place. Lyle quietly reflects on the situation and comes to believe that the saying is true. History really is written by the victors. The reality behind Bansium's victory seems far removed from what is officially recorded. Novum, watching Lyle, tells him that she believes he will one day become a man just as admirable as Slay. She encourages him to trust in himself. Soon after, Novum reminds Lyle that their carriage is about to depart. During the journey, Lyle and Novum decide to change their destination to Darien. This decision comes from a story they hear from a tobacco merchant along the way. The merchant warns them to stay away from Orin, explaining that the city tends to favor mercenaries and is not well suited for novice adventurers. Instead, he recommends Darien, saying that it is far more appropriate for beginners like them and, above all, a much safer city. Novum takes the time to verify the information and urges herself to make a firm decision. The first person to complain about this choice is Basil, who scoffs and declares that Lyle is incapable of making decisions on his own. A few days later, Lyle and Novum finally arrive in the city of Darien. Lyle stretches his stiff body after the long journey, while Novum naturally lifts and carries their luggage. At that moment, Slay immediately speaks up, telling Lyle not to relax just because they have arrived. He urges Lyle to look around carefully, help Novum with the baggage, and stay alert at all times. Slay warns him that Lyle is no longer living in a luxurious mansion, so carelessness could easily lead to trouble. Basil soon appears and lectures Lyle, saying that this level of vigilance is nothing more than the most basic anti-theft measure. He questions whether Lyle has ever been taught such common sense, and from that alone, Basil concludes that the education Lyle receives under the current household must be severely lacking. Broad then steps in and counters Basil's criticism, stating that Lyle is originally the heir of the Walt family, so it is only natural for him to entrust minor details to the people around him. Crassel immediately interjects, reminding everyone that Lyle has already been stripped of his status as an heir. Because of that, Crassel argues that Lyle no longer has the luxury of being naive or behaving as if nothing has changed. Acting like that would be dangerous for Lyle in his current situation. Fredericks then adds that Lyle should be taking the initiative and thinking about Novum's position as well. Hearing that, Lyle realizes Frederick's point makes sense. He apologizes, then takes the luggage himself and invites Novum to go look for the guild together. Novum feels happy seeing Lyle take responsibility. Soon after, Lyle approaches three people who are chatting nearby and asks them where the guild is located. One of them asks whether Lyle and Novum are beginner adventurers. After receiving confirmation, they kindly point the way, explaining that the Adventurers Guild is a large building further ahead. Lyle thanks them politely and apologizes for the interruption before heading off with Novum toward the building. Among the three people they spoke to is a girl named Rachel. After Lyle and Novum leave, she asks her companion Rondo why he so casually labels them as rookie adventurers. Rondo replies that it is obvious and that there is nothing wrong with saying it. Their other companion, Ralph, urges them to get moving. Rachel tells Ralph not to get angry, but Ralph insists that he is not angry at all. Rondo, however, points out that Ralph very clearly looks irritated. Meanwhile, Lyle and Novum arrive in front of the massive guild building. Standing there, Lyle feels that this is the place where his life as an adventurer truly begins. When they step inside, the interior is bustling with people, almost like a marketplace. Novum explains that all these facilities exist for convenience, and that monsters defeated by adventurers can be turned into materials and exchanged for money. She also points out that the reception counters are located on the second floor. Lyle and Novum head upstairs and see three receptionists working there. They quickly notice that the lines are uneven. Novum observes that the female receptionist on the right is by far the most popular. At that moment, Crassel appears again and advises Lyle to choose the male receptionist on the left, whose sharp gaze looks rather intimidating. Crassel clarifies that he is not saying the female receptionist in the middle is bad, but he believes Lyle would benefit more from choosing the one on the left. Crassel goes on to criticize the receptionist on the right, saying that her attitude changes depending on a person's appearance and that she works as slowly as a snail. The female receptionist in the middle, on the other hand, efficiently and calmly hands out documents. Still, Crassel's attention remains on the rough-looking male receptionist on the left. He observes that the man works neatly, responds politely, and treats everyone equally. From this, Crassel concludes that the receptionist takes pride in his job. Taking Crassel's advice to heart, Lyle asks Novum to line up with him at the counter on the left. Novum is surprised and says that she thought Lyle would choose the middle one instead. Lyle admits that he initially planned to do so. When their turn comes, the receptionist greets them with a stern expression. He quickly deduces that they are newcomers and asks whether Lyle and Novum are here to register as adventurers today. Both of them answer clearly and confidently that they are. After some time passes, Lyle and Novum finish their registration and receive their guild identification cards. The receptionist who handles them introduces himself as Hawkins. To Lyle, Hawkins turns out to be an excellent receptionist, far kinder and more patient than his intimidating appearance suggests. Novum agrees, adding that Hawkins is especially helpful because he explains many basic things they never knew as beginner adventurers. Once everything is settled, Lyle feels the exhaustion finally catching up to him. He suggests that they find an inn and get some proper rest. Novum nods but reminds him not to forget to read the guild's handbook. Lyle sighs inwardly, thinking that the real reason he feels so drained is not the journey, but his irritating ancestors who never seem to leave him alone. Not long after they arrive at the inn, Basil summons the guy into the space inside the gemstone. When Lyle appears there, he immediately complains that he barely has any mana left. Basil replies that this is exactly why only he is present this time. He tells Lyle to stay quiet and listen carefully. Once Lyle reluctantly agrees, Basil begins explaining that there are several details he wants to confirm regarding Ceres. Lyle asks what Basil wants to know. Basil recalls that Lyle once described Ceres as giving off a strange atmosphere, an air of perfection so overwhelming that it drove the entire Walt household into madness. Basil asks directly whether Ceres appears unusually captivating despite her young age, the kind of beauty that unconsciously charms and influences everyone around her. Lyle answers that although Ceres is still young, people do not describe her as cute, but rather as beautiful. He also remembers that ever since her attitude changed, marriage proposals arrive for Ceres almost every single day. Basil then asks whether Lyle has ever heard of the beautiful woman named Agrissa, a figure who once shook the entire nation. Lyle responds that, according to the books he has read, corruption in the old Centrist kingdom gave rise to people like Agrissa and eventually led to war. Basil looks stunned and mutters that if that is all the historians have written, then they are far too careless. Lyle replies that even if Basil complains to him, it will not change what is already written in history. Basil sighs and says they should get straight to the core of the issue. He begins recounting his own past, explaining that he is born 50 years after the founding of the Bansium Kingdom. When Basil is 10 years old, he hears a story from 300 years ago, from a time before the current kingdoms existed. He hears it directly from an elderly man who used to be a soldier in those distant days, and Basil has many chances to listen to the man's first-hand accounts. The story is about the War of Agrissa. According to the old soldier, the people of that era seem as if they are trapped inside a dream. They fight in Agrissa's name, they kill for her sake, and they die for her sake, but none of it has anything to do with love or hatred. They do it simply to see her smile. Then, after Agrissa dies, everyone suddenly begins saying the same thing. They all ask the same question. Why did we fight at all? Basil asks Lyle whether this story sounds familiar. He then asks about the current state of the Walt household. Lyle thinks about it and realizes that it is indeed very similar. Everyone in the Walt family residence is completely obsessed with Ceres. Basil explains his own theory. Monsters like Agrissa always appear at critical turning points in history. They are misguided children of God, humans who receive blessings from an evil god separated from the benevolent goddesses. Their existence heralds an era where countless men are destined to die. Basil finally states his conclusion without hesitation. In his eyes, Ceres is the same kind of being. Ceres, he declares, is a fallen child of God. Basil informs Lyle that Ceres, the younger sister of Lyle, is a fallen child of God. The conclusion leaves a heavy impression on Lyle, but the discussion soon shifts as he returns to speaking with Novum. Novum explains that new adventurers can receive direct guidance from experienced adventurers, although such guidance must be requested formally through the guild. She believes that they may be able to get introduced to a trustworthy adventurer and ask that person to train them properly. Lyle admits that both he and Novum truly know nothing about the practical world of adventurers, so guidance feels necessary to him. At that moment, Basil intrudes and calls Lyle foolish, claiming that guidance is unnecessary. From Basil's perspective, Lyle only needs to go outside and defeat monsters repeatedly to solve everything. Shortly after, Crassel appears and tells Lyle not to listen to Basil, dismissing Basil as someone who only knows how to solve problems through brute force. Lyle comments to Novum that the guild seems far more beginner-friendly than he initially expects. Novum replies that, personally, she supports receiving instruction from a dedicated mentor, but she wants to confirm Lyle's opinion first. She asks what he thinks. Lyle then asks whether they are able to choose the type of training they want. When he checks the guild manual, both he and Basil are shocked to discover that exclusive guidance requires a full payment of 20 gold coins. Basil reacts immediately, remarking that with that amount of money, Lyle could hire an entire group of mercenaries. Crassel counters by pointing out that Novum is the daughter of a baron, so possessing such an amount is not impossible for her. Fredericks disagrees with both of them, stating that the issue is not money at all. In his view, the problem lies in the possibility that Lyle may receive instruction from an incompetent adventurer, which would make the entire arrangement meaningless. Slay, on the other hand, observes that Novum appears to know exactly what she is talking about. After considering everything, Lyle states that exclusive guidance is simply too expensive for the two of them. He suggests that they instead participate in the general training program, which he can afford right away. Novum immediately rejects this idea, even though it comes from Lyle himself. To her, this decision is no longer open to negotiation. Lyle is caught off guard and wonders why Novum asks for his opinion in the first place if she is so firm. Novum then calmly explains her reasoning. In general training sessions, the instructor changes every day, making it impossible to build a proper relationship or consistent understanding. Such an arrangement is likely to cause difficulties later on. Even if they happen to be assigned to an excellent instructor, the training would still be wasted if it ends after a single day. She emphasizes that this decision is made for Lyle's future. She refuses to take shortcuts or compromise over something as temporary as money. If Lyle aims to become a first-rate adventurer, then instruction from a high-class mentor is essential. Novum continues by explaining that if Lyle wishes to become the head of the family who stands on equal footing with his predecessors, or even surpasses them, then he needs a solid foundation to support that ambition. She urges Lyle to aim for a future where his name is known throughout the world. In Novum's eyes, this moment represents the very first page of Lyle's brilliant success story. As Lyle listens to her, he cannot help but wonder how this discussion quietly transforms into something so grand and far-reaching. Novum grows animated as she explains that the guild states very clearly they will only assign their very best instructors to exclusive guidance. To her, it is crucial that they receive deep, thorough instruction from someone truly skilled, so they can firmly grasp the fundamentals from the very beginning. As for the 20 gold coins, Novum insists that it is merely a declaration of her resolve. For the sake of the guy's future, this initial investment, meant to secure such a title and level of instruction, is a small price to pay. The guy is left utterly stunned by Novum's explanation. After she finishes speaking, silence falls. The guy and even his ancestors remain frozen in shock. Eventually, the guy understands what Novum means, and he realizes that he cannot bring himself to refuse her. Still, one question remains in his mind. Where could they possibly obtain that many gold coins? Novum calmly answers that she already has them. She tells the guy not to worry about money at all and urges him to focus entirely on his education and the training he needs. The guy hesitantly asks whether the money comes from the Fuchs family. Basil immediately cuts in, telling him to stop asking questions. At that moment, the guy finally understands what Basil is trying to imply. However, Novum has already begun to explain. She says that she brought her savings with her when she left home, but she realized it would not be enough. So she sold all the clothes and equipment she had prepared for her engagement with the guy. She apologizes to him, explaining that she does not want to trouble her parents any more than she already has. Broad reacts strongly, saying he suspected as much. Even if Novum is the daughter of a baron, she should not have access to that much money in her current situation. Moreover, a bridal dowry is the most precious asset for an unmarried woman. Broad finds it hard to believe that Novum truly sold it, especially considering how deeply she cares for the guy. The guy's ancestors continue arguing among themselves about Novum's attitude and feelings toward him. Meanwhile, the guy falls silent, his head hanging low. Crassel remarks that sulking is pointless now, since what Novum has sold is already gone. He argues that they should instead focus on making the guy into an outstanding adventurer, so that Novum's sacrifice does not go to waste. Crassel adds that the guy can always buy Novum a new dowry with the money he earns in the future. Seeing the guy remain downcast, Novum asks how he is feeling. She gently tells him not to burden himself with guilt over this, emphasizing that everything she did was of her own free will. She adds that she has never once regretted spending 20 gold coins to support the guy's dream. Then Novum smiles. Basil tells the guy to calm himself. Still, the guy feels overwhelmed by emotions he cannot put into words. Novum begins to worry about him. Finally, the guy asks, his voice trembling, why Novum would go so far for someone like him, especially when even his own parents have already given up on him. He explains that he is no longer a noble, and that his engagement to Novum has already been broken. He asks what possible reason Novum could have to remain by his side. The guy admits that he has already fallen into despair. He does not know what Novum expects from him, but he feels certain that he will only disappoint her. He confesses that he has always acted spoiled and vented his anger on Novum, and that even now, despite everything she has done for him, he cannot stop himself from being this way. Tears spill from his eyes as he says that Novum surely understands his condition, that he knows nothing and has nothing. No matter how hard she tries, he believes her efforts will be wasted on someone like him. He asks if Novum knows how isolated he was within his own household. Novum clenches her fists and steps closer to the wounded guy. She tells him that he is an incredible man. Even when he was alone at the estate, he worked tirelessly. She saw that he never gave up, that he continued to face everything head-on. He stood firm and tried to improve himself instead of running away. The guy shakes his head and says she is wrong. It is not that he refused to run, rather, he lacked the courage to do so. He admits that he was terrified of Ceres. No matter how much he trained with the sword or studied magic, his legs refused to move when he stood before her. He did not run. Instead, he fought in a futile struggle, foolishly believing that his efforts would be rewarded. He calls himself a coward. He goes on to say that all he ever wanted was for someone, anyone, to look at him. He says that this is already over, because he is not the man everyone thinks he is. There is no point in Novum sacrificing her life for him, only to make him feel even more miserable than he already does. The guy continues crying, convinced that Novum is too kind, and that he cannot allow her to remain with him when no happiness awaits her here. Then suddenly Novum speaks. She says that she has been watching him all along, and that she has always been paying attention to him. Novum then pulls the guy into a tight embrace. She explains that she has lost count of how many times she saw him working tirelessly by himself at his family's estate. There were even moments when she called out to him, but he was always so deeply focused on improving himself that he never had time to notice her. The guy recalls replying back then that he did not have the luxury to worry about her, before immediately returning to his training. As he listens, the guy realizes that Novum is right. He truly did try to spend every waking moment training and studying. To him, nothing was ever good enough, and every minute he was not improving felt like a complete waste. In the end, he shut out everything around him without realizing it. Novum then tells him that he needs to understand something important. She herself received strength from him. She explains that the Fuchs family has a short history as high-ranking nobles. Hidden behind polite smiles, many lords and ladies look down on the Fuchs family, treating them with contempt and seeing them as lowly newcomers. When Novum was still a child, she was frequently harassed by children of other noble families. She was often isolated, pushed aside, and deliberately excluded. During those times, the young guy would always come running the moment he saw what was happening, driving away the bullies without hesitation. When Novum was left alone and forced to play by herself, he would always call out to her. Hearing this, the guy realizes that he has no memory of such events at all. He wonders if something like that truly happened, and he brushes it off as Novum exaggerating things that are not worth thinking about so deeply. Novum gently disagrees. To her, The guy's support during those days was incredibly comforting. That is why, when the proposal for her engagement to him arrived, she was genuinely overjoyed. At that moment, she made a vow deep in her heart. She would always support him, and she would always be there whenever he needed her. The guy says that he is not worth making such a big deal over, and that he does not deserve to be valued like that. Novum tightens her embrace and tells him that he has done enough. She believes that with all her heart. She says that she understands him better than anyone else in the world, and from this day forward, she has decided that she will always remain here, watching over him closely. At that, the guy finally breaks down completely. Through his tears, he says that it is all a lie, that everyone says things like that at first, only to leave him behind in the end. He asks why Novum would humiliate herself by staying here with him. He begs her to admit that she actually wants to be by Ceres' side, just like everyone else. Novum hugs him even tighter and firmly tells him that is not true. No matter what happens in the future, she has decided that she will stay by his side forever, and that she will always long for him. She tells him that she is not asking him to return her feelings. All she asks is that he allow her to love him, because that alone is more than enough for her. The guy continues crying in her arms. Novum tells him that he is someone worthy of her devotion, and that this is something only she has the right to decide. She asks him not to ever say again that he is worthless. The guy nods weakly in agreement, and Novum thanks him softly. The next day, the guy and Novum head to the Darien Guild building. Along the way, Basil and Broad tease the guy about what happened the previous night, mocking him for crying in Novum's arms. Annoyed, the guy snaps back that he had completely run out of mana and was mentally exhausted, which made his emotions unstable. He tells his ancestors to be quiet. Meanwhile, Novum submits their request for guidance to Hawkins. Hawkins carefully asks whether the guy and Novum are truly certain about requesting a personal instructor. Novum answers with unwavering confidence that they are. Just then, someone approaches and comments that Hawkins looks rather gloomy. The newcomer points out that submitting such a request is entirely within their rights. If they have paid the required fee, then Hawkins's role is simply to process it. Hawkins admits that this is true. Curious, Novum asks Hawkins who the man is. Hawkins introduces him as Zelfi, a veteran adventurer. If the guild approves the request from the guy and Novum, then Zelfi will become their personal instructor. Zelfi then turns toward them and greets the two of them calmly. Lyle feels shocked when his ancestors instruct him to marry Novum. Even so, Frederick still fails to understand why Novum is able to develop feelings for Lyle, and he therefore resolves to support Lyle's goal, which he personally believes is already destined to fail. From Frederick's perspective, Lyle will never find a girl better than Novum, because Novum is someone who is willing to do anything for Lyle. For that reason, abandoning Novum is not an option at all. Lyle feels deeply hurt by Frederick's words, as they strike him more harshly than he expects. Another ancestor states that since the moment Lyle is expelled, it is already too late for him to concern himself with the family's marriage rules. However, because the partner in question is Novum, no fault can be found in this marriage at all. Yet another ancestor adds that if those troublesome rules are taken seriously, it would be extremely difficult for Lyle to find another potential bride who can easily satisfy every requirement imposed upon him. Basil then asks about the specific requirements that are being mentioned. It is revealed that there are 6 conditions in total. The girl must be attractive, healthy, physically strong, intelligent, have flawless skin, and possess outstanding magical talent. Basil reacts with visible shock and begins to wonder what kind of person could possibly create such unreasonable standards. Crassel points out that Basil only needs to look at a mirror, because the person who creates those rules is none other than Basil himself. Basil responds by admitting that he does not remember setting those conditions at all. Broad then questions whether Basil is aware of how many problems those principles have caused for everyone involved. Crassel grows increasingly irritated and feels the urge to punch Basil and smash his face because of that carelessness. In the midst of all this tension, Lau remains thoroughly confused by everything happening around him. At the same time, Zelfi and Lau proceed with signing their contract, officially marking the moment when Zelfi becomes Lyle's personal instructor. Zelfi makes it clear that Lyle and Novum need to understand that it is not common for 2 newcomers to hire a full-time instructor from the very beginning. Zelfi also emphasizes that there is no intention of treating either Lyle or Novum gently. Lyle and Novum accept these terms without objection, and Zelfi regards their reaction as a satisfactory response. As the first task, Zelfi orders Lyle to clean the roadside drainage gutter. When Lyle complains repeatedly, Zelfi immediately tells him to stop complaining and continue the cleaning work using a shovel. Zelfi reminds him that by signing the contract, Lyle has already promised to follow every instruction given by Zelfi. Lyle still cannot see the connection between this kind of labor and his future as an adventurer. Zelfi makes it clear that Lyle is not allowed to be selective when it comes to accepting requests. Feeling sorry for Lyle, Novum tries to take his place, but Zelfi stops her and warns her not to interfere with Lyle's assigned work. Zelfi explains that this type of labor forms the foundation of a properly functioning society. Zelfi also recognizes Lyle as a former pampered noble who is released into the ordinary world. According to Zelfi, this experience is going to be extremely important for Lyle throughout his entire life, because it is the kind of work that no one willingly chooses to do. Zelfi insists that Lyle must understand that the only reason the city continues to function is because there are people who handle undesirable jobs for individuals like Lyle. Broad comments that Zelfi does not need to make Lyle clean drainage gutters just to teach him about the world. Fines agrees with Broad, noting that Lyle still possesses a powerful bloodline regardless of his current situation. Slay argues that Lyle is now merely an adventurer, making such matters irrelevant. Fines counters by stating that Lyle carries the royal blood of Centris within him. Crassel finds it hard to believe that a member of their family secretly bears such an impressive legacy. Frederick speculates that this means Lyle and Ceres share the same blood as Agrissa. Fines then explains that Broad's wife is a virtuous woman and the only remaining descendant of Agrissa, and allowing such a refined bloodline to disappear would be a grave mistake. Basil concludes by stating that they now possess all the evidence they need to prove that Ceres is the child of an evil god. On the other side, Lyle begins to feel dizzy as his vision blurs and dark spots cloud his sight, until he eventually loses his balance and falls into the drainage gutter. Several people react in shock and immediately call out for someone to lift Lyle, who has just fainted, and move him to a shaded area so he can rest. At the same time, his ancestors urge Lyle to endure the situation, as they have no intention of allowing Novum to replace him. Meanwhile, Lyle himself feels completely unable to move his body. Zelfi observes the situation and concludes that Lyle's endurance is lower than she initially estimates. She determines that the only viable solution is to build Lyle's strength through even more demanding labor. Because of this incident, Lyle is officially judged to lack sufficient physical stamina, which ultimately forces him to work hard every single day without exception. Later on, Lyle receives his first B-grade evaluation of the day. Zelfi states that Lyle is finally starting to produce solid results, and under these circumstances, it can be confirmed that Lyle has successfully passed the test. The evaluation of an adventurer's work is divided into 5 stages, with rewards varying depending on the grade received. If Lyle earns a C grade or higher, it indicates that the client is satisfied with the outcome of the job. Elsewhere, Lyle notices a large-built man who receives a D grade and reacts angrily toward the supervisor. The supervisor explains that the man has delegated his assigned work to someone else, and that this behavior is personally witnessed during supervision. Zelfi then approaches the scene and asks what the man wants to achieve by causing a disturbance. The large-built man issues a warning, telling Zelfi to know her place as a woman. In response, Zelfi decisively beats him down, striking him until he collapses in pain. After restraining his arm, Zelfi questions him again about what he believes a woman should do. The man trembles in fear and claims that he is merely protesting a result that he feels makes no sense. Zelfi responds that making excuses is meaningless, as the field supervisor directly observes the man's laziness. She warns him not to bring further disgrace upon the guild and orders him to return to collect his reward without causing more trouble. Zelfi then instructs Lyle to go and pick up Novum as well. When Lyle wonders about Zelfi's own plans, Zelfi takes her leave from him. At the Darien Guild, Lyle receives 8 large copper coins as his reward, prompting Novum to praise his efforts. Lyle acknowledges that the work is difficult, but he explains that he does his best to endure and complete it properly. He then asks about Novum's condition. Novum explains that her transcription work earns her 6 large copper coins. Lyle reflects on this outcome and realizes that a single adult can earn 15 large copper coins in 1 day of labor, which is still more than the combined income earned by both Lyle and Novum together. Suddenly, someone asks whether Lyle and Novum have finished working for the day. That person turns out to be a woman named Rachel. Lyle then learns that Rachel has also completed her work, as she explains that she needs to earn money while her two frontline members are taking a rest. Rachel is a senior adventurer whose party consists of 3 people, with the other 2 being Rondo, a warrior, and Ralph, a marksman. Their primary focus lies in extermination missions, but the constant burden placed on Vanguard-type fighters is extremely heavy. Because of that, both Rondo and Ralph are currently resting, while Rachel takes on transcription work, the same type of job Novum is doing. Rachel mentions that Novum has become a topic of discussion among scribes, as Novum's handwriting is widely admired and highly popular. Lyle praises Novum upon hearing this, while Novum herself considers such praise excessive. Rachel then explains that Novum completes her work quickly and with beautiful composition, which leaves Rachel genuinely impressed. On this very day alone, Novum manages to earn 11 large copper coins. This is the reason Rachel hopes that Novum is willing to teach her a few techniques to help improve the quality of her own work. Lyle feels shocked upon hearing this, as Novum previously tells him that she only earns 6 large copper coins. Marcus suspects that Novum is simply being considerate toward Lyle, trying to protect his pride and make him feel at ease. Basil remarks that such behavior is exactly what one would expect from Novum. Basil further speculates that Lyle is feeling emotional because he cannot earn as much as Novum while working in physically demanding labor. Basil even jokes that Lyle feels relieved earlier because he believes Novum earns less than him. As a result, Novum becomes anxious and confused, unsure of what she should say to Lyle. Meanwhile, Rachel notices something is wrong and wonders what is happening. Lyle suddenly claims that he remembers another task he still needs to take care of today. Immediately after that, Lyle leaves the area. Rachel grows curious about what causes Lyle to hurry away so abruptly, while Novum senses that she understands what Lyle is feeling inside. Lyle runs off while frustration and anger continue to build within him. Basil comments that Lyle should already be mature by now, yet instead he runs off alone like a child. To Basil, this behavior is nothing but a waste of time, and he questions whether Lyle plans to try doing something worthwhile before drowning in self-pity. Crassel then tells Basil to be quiet, pointing out that Basil keeps provoking and belittling Lyle. Basil responds by insisting that he is not provoking anyone and claims that he is merely offering words meant to encourage Lyle. Crassel grows irritated, believing that Basil's words only add salt to Lyle's wounds. Slay intervenes and urges both Basil and Crassel to calm down. Frederick states that Lyle may not be particularly skilled at anything, but he firmly believes that Lyle possesses several good qualities within himself. Broad reacts with irritation and declares that his grandson can accomplish anything as long as he puts in the effort. Hearing this, Lyle becomes even more upset and removes his gemstone necklace. Basil then provokes Lyle further, telling him to throw the necklace away, as Basil refuses to waste time teaching his own arts to a whining child who understands nothing. Lyle responds by throwing the necklace aside and demanding to be left alone. The other ancestors react with anger and curse Basil, calling him an idiot, because Lyle truly discards his gemstone. Unexpectedly, the gemstone strikes a woman who happens to be passing by. The woman, who is dressed in a maid's outfit, falls to the ground, causing Lyle to panic as he immediately runs toward her in concern. The woman reacts in shock and explains that she still has work to do today, while also questioning what is actually wrong with Lyle. Overwhelmed by guilt, Lyle apologizes repeatedly and feels deep regret, believing that a simple apology cannot possibly make up for what he has done. The woman notices Lyle's emotional state and asks why he is crying. Lyle wipes away his tears, and the woman calmly returns the gemstone to him. She assumes from the detailed carving that the gemstone must be something very precious to Lyle. She then reveals that she also possesses a similar item inherited from her own family. Lyle sees that hers is a red gemstone, and he explains that his own gemstone is a family heirloom, admitting that he loses his temper and acts impulsively. The woman advises Lyle not to throw such an object again, and if he ever does, he should at least make sure it does not hit anyone. She points out that Lyle is fortunate the gemstone hits her instead, because if it strikes someone else, he might already be beaten badly. Lyle agrees with her reasoning and apologizes once more. Slay explains that even though Lyle throws the gemstone away, their voices do not disappear. Instead, The distance only increases the burden on Lyle's mana, since he remains bound to the gemstone. What Lyle truly loses is the future benefit it provides. Unlike the woman's gemstone, Lyle's gemstone evolves and possesses its own will, which manifests through the reproduction of memories recorded from its previous users in the past. Suddenly, the woman comes up with an idea. She suggests that if Lyle genuinely feels guilty about what happens, then he should visit the shop where she works. Lyle hesitates and explains that he does not have much money. The woman asks whether Lyle has any large copper coins at all, and Lyle admits that he has only a small amount. She reassures him that it is not a problem and invites him along, stating that she will make sure Lyle is satisfied. Lyle attempts to avoid the situation, but the woman insists and says that she will personally attend to him. Lyle becomes startled and confused, questioning what she means by that implication. The woman responds by wondering whether she truly needs to spell it out for him, leaving Lyle in further shock. Meanwhile, Marcus reminds Lyle of Novum, emphasizing that it is impossible for Lyle to waste the money he earns through hard labor on a prostitute. At the same time, Broad remarks that he is carefully watching Lyle's actions. While following the woman dressed as a maid along the road, Lyle notices that many women wearing revealing and alluring outfits line both sides of the street. As they continue walking, the maid suddenly realizes that she has not introduced herself yet. She then introduces herself as Arya Lockwood, and Lyle responds by giving his own name in return. At the same time, Basil reacts internally upon hearing the surname Lockwood, only then realizing that the woman is a descendant of Lady Alice. Crassel questions whether that name holds any significance. Basil explains that Alice is his first love and adds that Arya bears a striking resemblance to her. Basil's 6 descendants grow confused by his reaction and begin wondering who Alice actually is. Elsewhere, Novum speaks with Zelfi and explains that Lyle has been acting strangely lately. Zelfi tries to confirm the facts and concludes that Lyle learns his earnings are lower than Novum's, then suddenly runs off while crying. Several hours later, Lyle returns with a refreshed expression, as if a heavy burden has been lifted from his shoulders. On the following day, Lyle invites the men from Rachel's party to go out with him, after which all of them disappear for several days. Rachel later confirms that this indeed happens. Zelfi quietly questions whether those people are incapable of behaving more sensibly. Zelfi then asks one final question to clarify the situation, specifically whether Novum has any physical contact with Lyle. Novum answers that, unfortunately, such contact does not occur. Rachel reacts with visible shock, prompting Novum to ask if something is wrong. Rachel quickly apologizes and explains that the situation is simply unexpected. Zelfi then asks what kind of relationship Novum actually has with Lyle. Novum answers that she is Lyle's former fiancée. At this revelation, Rachel becomes completely stunned. Rachel remarks that Lyle and Novum are exiled nobles and former fiancés, making their situation resemble a pair of young lovers running away together. She then questions why the two of them do not have a physical relationship. Zelfi steps in and attempts to calm Rachel down. Rachel apologizes again, admitting that she becomes overly excited by the story. She reflects that she cannot understand Lyle at all, considering that Novum is beautiful, has an excellent personality, and most notably, possesses a generous figure. Rachel concludes that Lyle must be out of his mind. Zelfi comments that it is acceptable if Lyle wishes to release his pent-up frustration, but it would not be good for him if that frustration leads him to betray Novum. Zelfi then asks whether they intend to take the initiative to capture Lyle. Novum responds by apologizing for causing trouble for both Zelfi and Rachel. Later that night, in a different place, Rondo expresses that he has been greatly looking forward to this visit for some time. Ralph agrees with Rondo and conveys his gratitude to Lyle for showing them this place. Lyle explains that he is actually the one who should be thankful, as he feels embarrassed about visiting a place like this on his own. When they arrive at their destination, Rondo admits that simply standing there makes him unable to avoid a sense of guilt toward Rachel. Ralph points out that bringing up Rachel's name at a moment like this is not appropriate. After that, the three of them enter the establishment together. Inside, they are welcomed by several attractive attendants. Arya approaches the three of them and expresses her appreciation to Lyle for coming back again. Ralph urges the attendants to stop wasting time, as their purpose for coming here is already clear, and his patience is running thin. Soon after, a wide variety of food is served to them. Arya apologizes for making them wait, but the three of them feel that the wait is more than worth it. They eagerly eat the cakes and consider a shop like this to be an incredible discovery. Ralph even feels confident that he will eventually conquer every item on the menu. Without them realizing it, Rachel stands behind Ralph, quietly watching them eat. Lyle and Rondo notice her presence and immediately panic. Rachel concludes that Ralph, Rondo, and Lyle come here with the intention of conquering every menu item available, which explains why the three of them sneak around like this. Ralph is startled and wonders why Rachel is here as well. Zelfi observes that the main appeal of the cafe lies in its sweet pastries and that its primary target customers are men. Normally, people like them would feel too embarrassed to be seen in a sweets cafe, but the hidden entrance and the convenient location work to their advantage. Novum then calls out to Lyle and asks what is going on in this place. Lyle also wonders what this situation means. He panics and insists internally that this is not what it appears to be. Basil attempts to calm Lyle and urges him to be honest, suggesting that Lyle claims he comes here to protect Arya from troublesome customers. Crassel criticizes Basil, stating that such remarks only complicate the situation further. Basil insists that Arya is far too adorable to be left alone in this cafe. Zelfi comments that she is relieved Lyle is not involved with unknown women here, and she does not condemn the habit of finding comfort in sweets. However, she notes that hiding it like this makes it seem as though there is something being concealed. The three women reach an agreement that this time it is the men's turn, and they decide to hold a lively gathering with an all-you-can-eat sweets buffet. The three men are taken aback by this decision. Ralph offers an apology to Rachel, after which Rachel asks the attendants whether it is possible to reserve the entire cafe. Meanwhile, Zelfi places an order for 3 roll cakes and 1 parfait. For some reason, Lyle and his 2 companions are suspected of cheating due to a misunderstanding. However, by sacrificing what little income he earns that day along with his own candy, Lyle somehow avoids punishment. During all this, Arya can only peek at the situation from behind one of the cafe's pillars. Back at the inn, Novum wishes to speak with Lyle. Lyle immediately feels anxious, and Basil suggests that Lyle should kneel on the floor. Even though Basil is the one who pushes Lyle to continue visiting the shop, it does not change the fact that Lyle chooses to hide his whereabouts from Novum. Because of that, Lyle prepares himself for the possibility of being slapped by her. Instead, Novum suddenly offers him a silver coin. Lyle becomes confused, as Novum does not appear angry and even gives him money. He wonders what this means. Novum explains that Lyle works every single day and therefore also needs time to rest. She advises him not to go out every day, as it is unhealthy to survive on sweets alone. Novum also states that she does not wish to interfere with Lyle's relationship with Rondo and Ralph. She suggests that Lyle gives the silver coin to the 2 of them and treats them well on their next visit. Marcus considers Novum's response to be perfectly composed, to the point that it feels unsettling. Finds comments that Lyle and Novum appear as though they have already been married for more than 50 years. Slay questions this impression, noting that Novum is supposed to be only 15 years old. Fredericks remarks that from his perspective, he sees Lyle as nothing more than a useless gigolo living off Novum. Lyle himself imagines a future in which he continues receiving allowance money from Novum just to amuse himself. He wonders how long he will remain this useless, and even thinks it would be easier if he were simply slapped instead. Later that night, Crassel scolds Basil over the matter of Arya, who turns out to be a descendant of Basil's first love. Marcus also questions Basil's true intentions in involving Lyle, suspecting that Basil aims to benefit his first love indirectly through Arya. Slay speculates that Basil intends to pair Lyle with Arya, which he finds disturbing, since Lyle already has Novum. Basil interrupts and demands that everyone stop, explaining that without Alice, the Walt family would never have existed. Fiennes asks what Basil means by that, as he has never heard of any support coming from the Lockwood family. Broad adds that even in his own era, he has no special connection with the Lockwood family. Basil insists that they are all mistaken and explains that he becomes independent because he wants to marry Alice, a princess from the imperial court family. However, Basil is only the 3rd son of a minor noble, making him an unsuitable match for her. Because of this, Basil gathers a team, uses that group to seize territory, and establishes his own authority. Marcus develops a headache upon realizing that the primary motivation driving the first family head to venture into the wilderness and establish the Walt household is simply a desire to marry his beloved. Slay guesses that Basil and Alice never marry, and that Basil is rejected by her. Basil denies being rejected, and explains that he and Alice never even speak to one another. By the time Basil arrives, Alice is already married, and becomes part of the Lockwood family. Hearing this, his 6 descendants react in shock. Marcus summarizes that the family founder develops the wilderness and creates their lineage in an attempt to approach a woman he has never even spoken to. Basil accepts this description, stating that such behavior reflects the recklessness of youth. Crassel calls them all fools, pointing out that their very existence depends on such an absurd truth. Basil declares that fate is now in motion, as his descendants have reunited with Alice's lineage through Arya. To Basil, this scenario represents the turning of the wheel of destiny that he once set in motion while chasing his first love. Slay smiles faintly and suggests stepping back for a moment. He asks Basil to imagine a grown adult passionately speaking about a first love and a destined reunion, and wonders what Basil would think while listening to such a speech. Basil becomes confused by the question. Broad then states that now that the atmosphere has calmed, he wants to clarify something. He explains that the reason for their presence is to pass down the use of their arts to Lyle, and that the unfulfilled first love of the family founder holds no relevance for him. Lyle finally remembers that his ancestors do not appear merely to harass him. Fredericks agrees that it is time to address the main topic, noting that some of the ancestors talk too much and waste enough time on pointless discussions. Marcus explains that as a leader, he understands the urge to overcome obstacles that hinder progress, especially when it concerns the first generation of techniques and the foundation supporting future generations, namely a comprehensive enhancement of abilities. Basil, however, insists that it is impossible for him to teach his art to a child like Lyle. Lyle reacts in shock. Crassel presses a hand to his forehead, and Slay laughs, remarking that the very reason for their presence is completely rejected. Broad points out that they have discussed this matter with Basil countless times, emphasizing that the simplest way to compensate for Lyle's lack of mana and to teach their other arts is to strengthen him through full over. Basil responds by claiming that he is not a true adult, as he is a leader still consumed by thoughts of fate and his first love. Crassel grows genuinely angry and demands that his father stop treating everything like a game. Their argument continues until Broad informs Lyle that today's meeting is postponed and that the discussion will resume at a later time. Morning arrives, and Lyle wakes up feeling as though he is not fully rested. At the Darien Guild, Zelfi gives instructions to Lyle and Novum, stating that 3 weeks have passed and that it is time to move on to the next stage. Zelfi invites Lyle and Novum to take on missions beyond the city walls, leaving both of them surprised. Zelfi decides that they will depart the day after tomorrow and instructs them to prepare their equipment. If anything turns out to be missing, Zelfi plans to have Lyle work to make up for it. With that, Zelfi leads them toward an adventure that involves battling monsters. At the Darien Guild, Hawkins asks what Zelfi plans to evaluate today. Zelfi responds that Lyle appears to be doing fairly well lately. She explains that Lyle approaches his work with seriousness and sincerity, giving her no reason to complain. Normally, former pampered noble children tend to mock or look down on the kind of labor Zelfi assigns, but Lyle does not show such an attitude at all. Hawkins feels pleased upon hearing this. Hawkins then wonders whether Lyle's former noble status alone is truly sufficient justification for Zelfi to personally keep watch over him. He also questions whether it is safe to assume that the local lord remains alert to any potential problems that might arise from the presence of this young man. Zelfi clarifies that she is merely an ordinary adventurer who can be found anywhere, and that this has nothing to do with the regional leader. She notices the money placed on the table and explains that she simply accepts the job and decides to train Lyle accordingly. Hawkins apologizes, admitting that he momentarily forgets that this explanation is the official story Zelfi always uses. Zelfi then asks why Hawkins brings up the local lord in a place like this. She also mentions that a new party has recently arrived in Darien and has caused a great deal of trouble, leading her to wonder what exactly is going on with them. Hawkins replies that guild policy prevents him from freely sharing the personal information of fellow adventurers. He then informs Zelfi that Lyle and Novum have already arrived and suggests that she go and keep an eye on them. Zelfi gladly accepts, as her role as an instructor feels comfortable, easy, and enjoyable to her. She also finds it helpful, since sheltered children like them tend to be naive and honest. Hawkins offers his prayers for their success in the upcoming monster extermination. Zelfi assures him that they will return and asks him to prepare their reward, to which Hawkins responds that the guild will gladly wait for their safe return. Zelfi then explains that the target for Lyle and Novum on this mission is slime monsters. She instructs them that there are two effective ways to defeat a slime: destroying its outer body or targeting its core. She emphasizes that it is especially important to remember that slime movement is surprisingly fast. Zelfi demonstrates the proper motion herself, and with a single precise thrust of her sword, the slime is defeated instantly. She explains that if Lyle and Novum become surrounded, even a situation involving small enemies like slimes can quickly turn dangerous. She cautions them not to become overconfident, to remain constantly aware of their surroundings, and to act with care. Zelfi then alerts them to another slime approaching from behind the bushes and asks Lyle to demonstrate his ability. Lyle draws his sword, and Zelfi observes that he is already accustomed to holding one. Basil mocks him, suggesting that Lyle should be using a larger sword. Crassel comments that hunting with a bow would be ideal, while Slay suggests that Lyle should stick with whatever weapon he is most familiar with. Fiennes proposes a spear as a safer option, and Broad dismisses all of them, insisting that Lyle should be carrying a firearm instead. Ignoring the conflicting opinions, Lyle provokes the slime by throwing a stone toward it. As the slime reacts, Lyle steps in and slashes at it. The slime slowly splits apart and melts into the ground. For Lyle, the task feels easy, and he wonders whether handling it in this manner is sufficient. Zelfi notices that Lyle deliberately avoids the core and instead cleanly divides the outer body into two with swift precision. She praises his technique and execution. Basil dismisses the achievement by pointing out that the opponent is only a slime. Slay remarks that this performance merely meets the minimum standard he expects. Broad, however, reacts with irritation and states that Lyle's true capability far exceeds something like this. Lyle accepts these reactions calmly and expresses his gratitude for the praise directed toward him. After that, Zelfi instructs Lyle to collect the materials from the defeated slime, explaining that both the core and the outer body can be sold. Lyle understands her explanation clearly and begins gathering the remains. He notices that his sword feels extremely sticky from the residue. At the same time, Basil senses something ominous and urges Lyle to prepare his weapon for combat. Lyle turns around and warns both Zelfi and Novum. Basil informs them that the three of them are being watched. Zelfi acknowledges that Lyle notices it first and admits that he truly impresses her today. She tells both of them to remain alert to their surroundings and instructs Novum to stay at the center of their formation. Lyle then announces that the monsters have already arrived. Zelfi identifies them as a group of goblins, noting that it is unusual to encounter a goblin pack this close to the city. She quickly counts 8 goblins directly ahead and 4 more on Lyle's side. Zelfi wonders what the goblins are doing in this area and speculates that they may have lost a territorial conflict elsewhere. One of the goblins suddenly launches an attack on Zelfi, prompting her to engage in battle. She swiftly defeats one of them, reducing their number to 11. Zelfi then orders Lyle and Novum to retreat back to the city, stating that she will cover their escape. Basil supports this suggestion and advises the same course of action. However, Lyle calmly responds that there is nothing to worry about. Basil and Zelfi react in surprise, while Novum feels a quiet sense of pride, realizing that Lyle does not choose to run away. Broad feels that everyone underestimates Lyle far too much. From Broad's perspective, the goblins have no chance of winning at all, even with their superior numbers. He pushes Lyle forward, expecting him to demonstrate what he is truly capable of. Lyle responds by instructing Novum to watch the rear, and Novum follows his direction without hesitation. Lyle then moves ahead, while Zelfi calls out to him in concern. Unexpectedly, Lyle cuts down one of the goblins with a clean strike. Zelfi is visibly taken aback by this outcome. Shortly after, Broad alerts the group to 2 goblins approaching near Lyle's feet. Lyle immediately slashes one of them, while the other is taken down by a fireball spell. Basil then warns that there is a goblin archer positioned behind Lyle. Novum reacts quickly and releases a wind bullet spell, successfully defeating the goblin threatening Lyle from behind. After several intense exchanges, only 3 goblins remain. Lyle launches a large-scale magical attack that overwhelms them and leaves all 3 goblins disoriented. Basil is shocked by this display, recognizing that such an attack is something only a trained mage should be capable of using. Lyle steps forward and seeks Zelfi's approval before finishing the remaining enemies. He then cuts down the last 3 goblins without mercy, pushing himself to the point of severe exhaustion. Novum approaches Lyle and praises him, recognizing the battle as a truly decisive victory. Lyle, however, feels confused, realizing that his mana is completely depleted, something that never posed a problem for him in the past. Novum suspects that Lyle may have been injured somewhere during the fight. Lyle clarifies that he has simply run out of mana. Zelfi reflects on the situation, considering that Lyle's noble background would naturally explain his ability to use magic. However, his magical prowess far exceeds her expectations and rivals that of a genuine mage. What leaves the strongest impression on Zelfi is not his magic, but his swordsmanship. She wonders what kind of sword technique he is using and senses that there is something fundamentally different about him, something that does not align with conventional noble fighting styles. A powerful determination radiates from Lyle's blade. In every swing, there is a clearly embedded obsession, an unwavering fixation on revenge. His sword moves with a singular purpose, driven solely by that desire. It feels as though his blade is sharpened endlessly, as if no level of mastery is ever sufficient, as if he is constantly trying to overcome an invisible, insurmountable wall by any means necessary. Zelfi knows that Lyle is the eldest son of the Walt family, a family that has been expelled and stripped of its status. She realizes that she may have underestimated the weight of that reality. She had assumed Lyle was merely a naive former noble, sheltered by wealth and unaware of the harshness of the world. Now, she questions how she should guide a former noble who carries such an overwhelming burden. With that thought in mind, Zelfi expresses her desire to understand what has shaped Lyle into the person he has become. Arya searches for her father and ends up finding him in the same place yet again, standing there in a dazed, unfocused state. She urges him to leave quickly before more trouble arises. At that moment, a fat man approaches and remarks that Arya always seems to have a hard time dealing with her father. He expresses mock pity that Arya has to take care of a drunken parent while he himself has to keep his business running here, then bluntly demands payment. Arya apologizes, explaining that she does not have any money today, and asks for time until next week to pay him back. The fat man scoffs, saying that she said the exact same thing last week. He adds that it does not matter whether Arya's father was once a baron or anything else. Rumors are already spreading throughout the city about her father wandering around, opening gambling dens, and running away from his debts. Hearing this, Arya finally realizes just how deep her father's debts truly are. The man continues, stating that this is not the kind of debt Arya can repay simply by working an honest job. He suggests that if her debt continues to grow, he might have to use his connections to find her a job with much better pay. In his eyes, a beautiful girl like Arya has no reason to live in poverty. He is convinced that she could easily earn enough money to clear all her debts in a very short time. Meanwhile, at a sweet shop, Rondo asks Lyle whether he wants to know how to increase his mana. Lyle immediately agrees, admitting that running out of mana has become a serious problem for him. Ralph comments that he is not a mage himself, but wonders aloud whether simple training might help. Rondo shakes his head and says that they are talking about magical power here, not muscle training. He admits that this is not his area of expertise, so he cannot say for certain, but as far as he knows, the only option available to Lyle is growth through experience. Just then, the desserts they ordered arrive at the table. Ralph thanks the waitresses and feels relieved, knowing that Rachel will not scold him again later. While eating the cake, Rondo gives Lyle some realistic advice. He should always keep his limits in mind and use his mana efficiently, only when it is truly necessary. Lyle reflects that if only his ancestors had paid attention to such things and kept quiet, things might have turned out differently. He then thanks Rondo sincerely for the advice. Basil, meanwhile, turns his attention to Arya and praises her, much to Crassel's confusion, since Basil has never even spoken to Arya, let alone to Alice. Ralph then asks Arya whether prices have gone up recently. Arya confirms that they have, explaining that increased bandit activity has driven up merchant security costs, and rising raw material prices are affecting the entire city. Rondo suddenly remembers that it is time for them to take care of a security request they had previously accepted. He invites Ralph to come along, and Ralph agrees, thanking Lyle for treating them. Lyle, in turn, thanks both of them for listening to his story. With that, Ralph and Rondo say their goodbyes and leave the shop. After finishing cleaning up the dirty dishes, Arya comes over and sits down with Lyle. Lyle suddenly asks her about how mana is used, which leaves Arya visibly confused by the abrupt question. Lyle then explains that he asked because Arya also possesses a gem. Basil feels secretly pleased, thinking that Lyle has finally taken the initiative to take the first step toward getting closer to Arya. Arya responds that it is a bit embarrassing because she cannot make the device work at all, and she is convinced that it is simply because she lacks talent. Basil immediately warns Lyle to be careful not to hurt her feelings, while Lyle himself feels even more confused by the situation. Arya then admits that she has always admired adventurers like Lyle. What she truly wants is to go on adventures and earn a lot of money that way. If she could earn as much money as possible, her father's situation might improve, even if only a little. Realizing that she has spoken too much, Arya quickly apologizes for suddenly burdening Lyle with her complaints. Lyle reassures her, saying that she does not need to worry at all, because listening is the very least he can do for her. After all, Arya once comforted him when he was crying and at his lowest point. Arya agrees with him and acknowledges that he is right. She also mentions that she genuinely likes her current job because it is a valuable learning experience. But even so, she cannot help feeling a sense of envy toward Lyle Queensland by Lyle. Lyle becomes flustered, thinking that there are still so many things about himself that are far from admirable. Basil continues to provoke him relentlessly, while Slay quietly wonders whether Basil truly needs to seize every possible opportunity just to tease Lyle. Arya then asks whether it is not perfectly fine that Lyle is still inexperienced right now, since only a very small number of people can honestly say they succeeded from the very beginning. To her, the most important thing is that Lyle is able to recognize that the path he was on was not a good one. Once that realization is made, all that remains is to make an effort and change for the better. Basil is deeply moved, thinking that Arya's words are beautiful and that she truly has a kind and lovely heart. Lyle also understands that Arya is right, and he realizes that he genuinely needs to put forth his very best effort from now on. All of a sudden, Basil shouts that he finally remembers something. Crassel is immediately irritated by Basil's sudden outburst and asks what the problem is. Basil explains that the ridiculous matchmaking principle of their family actually has a story behind it. After experiencing heartbreak, Basil refuses to be with any other woman, firmly believing that Alice is the only one meant for him. Everyone around him continues to pressure him to marry, and in order to silence them, he blurts out several conditions for marriage during a drinking party. Even his descendants, including Broad, are stunned by this revelation. Basil himself cannot believe that his drunken rambling somehow survives and continues as a formal tradition for the next 7 generations. Crassel comments that he sees no reason to complain if he were to hit Basil for this. Slay adds that the family rule is indeed extremely troublesome, but when he looks at Lyle, it becomes clear that all their difficulties are repaid, as the family's magical ability increases dramatically as a result of this tradition. Fiennes agrees with Slay and adds that Lyle's swordsmanship is also fairly good. While it is not impressive enough to reach the level of his own boots, he considers it sufficient to be judged as a passing level. Fiennes also notes that Lyle is stronger than they initially assume. At the same time, he points out that there are several factors that cannot be ignored. Fredericks continues by stating that the most critical factor among them is Ceres. Fiennes agrees and elaborates further, explaining that Lyle's current combat ability already surpasses that of most experienced adventurers. In this new context, earlier events feel even more unsettling, as Ceres, who is only 13 years old and has never received any form of combat training, is able to defeat and toy with Lyle with ease. Because of this, Fiennes urges everyone to reconsider how they perceive Ceres. Basil states that he has mentioned many times before that Ceres is a child of an evil god. Marcus responds that he has never seen such proof himself and therefore cannot confirm it outright, but the current facts seem to strongly imply that such a possibility is very real. From Marcus's perspective, the situation appears to be leaning in that direction. Fredericks says that there is nothing they can do about it now. He observes that Ceres is actively trying to take Lyle's life, while Lyle himself lacks the strength to reclaim his position as the rightful heir. Basil declares that he can consider that issue settled for the time being, and then shifts the focus by asking how they should support young Arya from now on. Crassel is taken aback and questions what Basil means by that, also asking why they even need to discuss the girl in the first place. To Basil, however, Arya's situation is the most important issue at hand right now. Crassel and Basil continue arguing back and forth, and as the dispute drags on, Lyle begins to feel his mana draining away, to the point where he senses that he might lose consciousness. Elsewhere, Arya returns home on her own, feeling quietly pleased because she manages to bring leftover food from the cafe with her. As she walks through the streets, she remains unaware that two men with malicious intent are following her from behind. When Arya finally reaches her home, she finds her father sitting on the ground in front of their house. She reacts with concern and questions why he is sleeping outside. Her father explains that he has lost the door key somewhere and cannot get inside. Arya responds sharply, pointing out that if it were currently winter, he would have frozen to death long ago. After a brief pause, her father suddenly seems to realize something important and turns his attention fully to her. He reminds Arya that she is the proud daughter of a baron. Even though they are suffering through difficult times, he insists that he cannot accept her walking a path that resembles prostitution. He demands that Arya stop working in what he considers vulgar clothing. Arya is taken aback by his words. Her father then collapses forward, declaring that no matter how low they have fallen, they are still nobles, and he begs her not to disgrace their name further. Arya's frustration finally overflows. She tells him to look at her properly and states that the person who has dragged her into this situation is none other than him. She makes it clear that she is not the one who squandered their wealth or committed the actions that caused them to lose their status. She reminds him that he is the one responsible. Arya questions whether her father has forgotten the original reason they are forced to live like this in the first place. She points out that he no longer works, that he takes all the money she earns and wastes it on gambling and alcohol, and that he has even burdened her with debt. Through tears, Arya demands to know which of them is truly the most disgraceful in this situation. Overwhelmed, she breaks down crying and desperately begs her father to stand up and open his eyes to reality. At that moment, the two men who have been following Arya finally approach. They move in quickly, restraining her and forcibly abducting her. One of them states that they intend to take Arya with them as collateral for her father's unpaid debts. Her father reacts in shock, but he is powerless to intervene as Arya is dragged away before his eyes. At the Darien Guild, Lyle is shocked when he learns that Arya has been abducted. Zelfi confirms the report and explains that this matter arrives as a personal request directed to her. She adds that Lyle and Novum are now considered her superiors, so she believes it is more appropriate to discuss the situation with Lyle first before deciding how to proceed. Zelfi further explains that, for a more detailed account, Arya's father will personally clarify everything. Lyle reacts with surprise when he learns that Arya's father is West Lockwood. As he observes West more closely, Lyle notices that the injuries covering his body are severe enough to raise concern. He assumes that the kidnappers must have inflicted those wounds during the abduction. Zelfi corrects this assumption by stating that she herself is the one who struck West. She explains that after West's noble title is stripped away, many incidents have occurred, leading to the current situation. Lyle senses that there is more behind those words, but Zelfi cuts the explanation short and emphasizes that Arya's safety is the top priority at the moment. West then recounts his circumstances. He explains that he sinks deeply into debt, reaching a point where no one is willing to help him anymore, leaving him with no perceived options. One day, a man claiming to be part of a group of thieves approaches him with a proposal. Because the thieves cannot read or write, they need a mediator, and West is offered that role in exchange for good pay. As his financial situation temporarily improves, the group begins to trust him and entrusts him with increasingly large sums of money. From Lyle's perspective, it becomes clear that West must have misused that money. West admits his fear that those criminals intend to sell Arya to slave traders, and he desperately begs for Arya to be rescued. Zelfi is visibly shaken by this revelation, realizing that the threat involves not only bandits, but also slave traders. At that moment, a man approaches from behind Zelfi and comments that the city itself has become a serious problem, acknowledging that the situation has grown far worse than expected. Zelfi immediately recognizes him and reacts with surprise, addressing him as a noble figure. Lyle is stunned to realize that the man before them truly holds that status. Zelfi quickly moves closer and whispers to the noble, reminding him that he previously stated he would not interfere with her work. The noble questions whether that is truly the case. He then formally introduces himself to Lyle and Novum as Bentler Lobernia, the ruler of Darien. Lyle introduces himself in return. Basil notices that Bentler already addresses Lyle by name even before the introduction, and Slay concludes that Bentler must have investigated Lyle beforehand. Bentler then resumes the explanation of the situation. He acknowledges that he is aware of the presence of bandits around Darien, but he admits that this is a miscalculation on his part. He assumes that West Lockwood functions merely as a mediator for their infiltration, without realizing how deeply they have already intertwined themselves with the city. If those thieves are using Darien to launder their money, then Darien itself appears to be collaborating with criminals. In such a case, it would not be strange for neighboring rulers to believe that Darien is using bandits to plunder nearby territories. Furthermore, because the city's forces are currently fully deployed for the construction of a labyrinth, Darien lacks the manpower to launch a rescue operation for Arya. Lyle is left speechless by this explanation. Basil then provokes Lyle, insisting that the task should be assigned to Lyle alone. Basil mocks him as a coward and expresses disappointment in him. As Lyle attempts to respond, Basil interferes with his thoughts, disrupting his focus. Novum grows worried as confusion spreads among the others. Before anyone can fully grasp what is happening, Lyle suddenly loses consciousness and collapses. Suddenly, Lyle awakens inside the gemstone. Within that inner space, Crassel regards Basil as the worst among them. Although Crassel understands that Basil wants to save Arya, he believes that Basil's attitude toward Lyle is consistently harsh and damaging. Slay adds that Basil does not even fully understand what it truly means to save Arya. From Slay's perspective, Arya's father has committed serious crimes, and because of that, Bentler is likely to brand the entire Lockwood family as criminals and impose severe punishment on them as a warning to others. Marcus considers the possible outcomes and concludes that Arya may be sent to the mines or forced into prostitution to repay the debt. In Marcus's view, it may actually be less cruel for Arya to risk being purchased as a slave by a wealthy man. Basil grows irritated by such reasoning and dismisses it entirely, insisting that wanting to save someone cannot be wrong. He refuses to accept remaining silent and justifying inaction with miserable excuses. His frustration escalates as he questions the pride of his descendants and wonders whether Lyle intends to live the rest of his life in such a trivial and passive way. Basil harshly labels Lyle as irritating and calls him nothing more than a stain on the Walt household, insisting that Lyle must clearly declare his resolve to save Arya no matter what happens. At that point, Lyle begins to cry. Basil reacts with confusion, questioning why Lyle is crying at all, since Basil believes that everything said so far is nothing more than ordinary conversation. Crassel immediately intervenes, pointing out that Basil's way of speaking is excessively cruel. He urges Basil to be more mindful of Lyle's condition and reminds him why Lyle is even present there. Lyle is isolated in his own home and cast out by his family, yet he has worked harder than anyone else to live up to what it means to be a member of that family. Crassel emphasizes that calling Lyle a stain on the Walt name strikes him at the most painful point imaginable. Basil attempts to explain that he does not intend his words in that way. Fredericks then steps in, expressing that he understands how Lyle feels. He asks for permission to offer guidance and proceeds to explain that crying does not solve anything and only wastes precious time. What truly matters is deciding what one wants to do and then beginning from that decision. Fredericks reminds Lyle that all of them exist only as memories, gemstones created to pass their arts on to him. They cannot act for him in the outside world. However, those memories are filled with lived experiences, distilled into wisdom that they can still offer. Because of that, Fredericks urges Lyle not to be afraid and encourages him to speak honestly about what he wants at this very moment. In response, Lyle clenches his fist. With renewed resolve forming within him, he declares that he wants to take action and do something himself. Lyle continues to cry and admits that he does not know what to do. He truly has no idea what choice he should make, what action he should take, or whether someone like him even has the right to decide anything at all. In his mind, everything he does depends on Novum, and he believes he cannot accomplish anything on his own. Because of that, he fails to see the importance of understanding what he personally wants. Fredericks explains that this situation is not about whether Lyle is capable or incapable of achieving something. Even if Lyle chooses to run away, That choice alone does not change anything for Fredericks or the others. They would not be angry with him, because such a decision would still be a genuine expression of Lyle himself. Fredericks encourages Lyle to express his feelings honestly, without trying to justify them or suppress them. As Lyle imagines Arya's face, he struggles to articulate his true emotions. Eventually, he admits that he wants to help Arya. He repeats this feeling several times, and as he does, the expressions of his ancestors soften into gentle smiles. Broad remarks that the answer is surprisingly simple and declares that the ancestors will support Lyle in seeing this through to the end. Basil also tells Lyle not to worry, stating that all 6 of them will continue to stand behind him. This sudden declaration causes the others to look at Basil in disbelief. Basil then explains that no one desires to save Lyle more than he does. Broad questions what has caused Basil's change in attitude, while Crassel bluntly states that Basil is unnecessary. Crassel points out that Basil has refused to teach his art to Lyle and has instead become a burden, constantly issuing selfish demands without consideration, which deeply frustrates Crassel. Broad intervenes and suggests that they move forward by holding a strategy meeting, beginning with the preparation of a proposal to present to the ruler of Darien. At that moment, Basil grows irritated and declares that if saving Arya is the goal, he will teach Lyle how to use his art after all. Lyle reacts in disbelief, wondering whether Basil is serious. Basil clarifies that he will only teach the first stage. Crassel states that the long-awaited moment has finally arrived and decides that he, too, will teach his own art to Lyle. Slay reflects that his art may be too excessive for Lyle to handle, while Marcus counters that his own art is highly practical and should be comfortable enough for Lyle to use. After some time passes, Lyle awakens. Slay immediately urges him to remain calm, explaining that barely a single second has passed in the outside world. Lyle then states that he has formed a proposal for Bentler and believes it to be an effective solution. Zelfi responds that this is not a problem Lyle can resolve alone. Bentler, however, expresses willingness to listen, sensing that Lyle has conceived a meaningful plan. Bentler considers whether Lyle's idea concerns the bandit issue or the rescue of Arya. Lyle clarifies that his plan benefits both himself and Bentler, and therefore involves both matters at once. Elsewhere, at an abandoned mining site near Darien, the bandits discover a gemstone. The bandit leader, Boras, evaluates it and judges it to be of considerable quality. Arya demands that the gemstone be returned to her. Boras acknowledges Arya's courage, but mocks the weight of her words, noting that her current state diminishes their impact. One of the subordinates suggests handing Arya over to the slave traders. Boras agrees, reasoning that even in her ruin, Arya remains a noblewoman and would fetch a high price. He orders his men not to touch her at all. After some time, however, Boras' thoughts begin to shift. He considers that simply handing Arya over may be a waste. He reasons that Arya has already surrendered a precious and extremely rare gemstone, and from his perspective, there would be no loss in taking advantage of her himself, even if her value were to decrease as a result. Lyle proposes that Bentler use his services for a price of 200 gold coins, not as the former heir of an earl's family, but purely as Lyle the adventurer. Bentler considers the offer to be highly ambitious for someone who calls himself an adventurer, especially since Lyle is a complete beginner, making the amount of 200 gold coins extraordinarily large by any standard. Zelfi openly labels Lyle as an arrogant and troublesome child and adds that Lyle is not a second-rate figure, implying that his attitude exceeds his position. Bentler then asks Zelfi to listen to the explanation until the end before passing judgment. Lyle feels relieved and grateful upon hearing this, even though deep down, he is actually frightened because he has angered Zelfi and sees her as being on the verge of losing her temper. Basil advises Lyle to avoid showing any sign of panic and to maintain a calm and composed demeanor. Following that advice, Lyle begins to explain his view of the highly capable bandit group, stating that Bentler has been overly accommodating toward them. Bentler asks Lyle to present concrete proof to support such a claim. Lyle explains that if the bandit group truly possesses the level of competence Bentler believes they have, then this discussion would not be happening at all. Guided and supported by Fredericks, Lyle further elaborates that the bandits' movements are entirely reactive, showing no trace of strategic planning. The fact that they rely on Arya's father to infiltrate Darien clearly demonstrates how shallow and limited their operation actually is. From Lyle's perspective, the only thing the bandits care about is acquiring quick money, and they have no long-term vision or clear direction for what this operation is supposed to achieve beyond that. Bentler comes to the realization that their purpose in coming to Darien is not to seize control of the city or overthrow its government, but simply to obtain money. He also states that they are likely not agents dispatched from another region. Lyle then adds that a smear campaign will begin the moment they obtain incriminating evidence against Bentler, and rumors about Darien's connection to the bandit group will spread rapidly. Bentler asks whether this situation could also be used to provide justification for another region to declare war, and Lyle confirms that this is indeed the case. After taking a moment to think, Bentler states that Lyle Walt is far wiser than the reports have suggested. He admits that he initially assumed Lyle was nothing more than a spoiled young noble, but he now recognizes that this assumption is incorrect. To Bentler, it feels as though he is speaking with a shrewd and seasoned noble rather than an inexperienced youth. Finding Lyle's explanation convincing, Bentler agrees to prepare the 200 gold coins as requested. He then invites the others to listen to Lyle's full proposal. At an abandoned mine near Darien, the subordinates report that a serious problem is unfolding. Boris reacts with irritation and demands to know what is happening, complaining that he is just about to reach the enjoyable part. One of the subordinates apologizes for the interruption and delivers the bad news that reports indicate Darien has already taken action. Boris responds by saying that he has been informed that the entire Darien military is deployed elsewhere. The subordinate explains that they are currently being attacked by Darien's adventurers, with 200 adventurers launching an assault against them. Boris is shocked and states that such a situation should be impossible, as he never expects the Honorable Bentler to bow his head and seek help from adventurers. The subordinate then clarifies that Bentler is not the one controlling this operation. Boris asks who else would take such an action, and the subordinate explains that, according to information from their spies within the guild, the person responsible is a foolish wealthy man attempting to buy influence by funding what is called a bandit suppression operation. It turns out that this is the work of a naive young noble named Lyle. Arya feels astonished as she listens to this revelation. Boris, on the other hand, laughs and calls it a classic example of a sheltered noble child, stating that Lyle merely gathers Darien's adventurers to inflate their numbers, something Boris finds pitiful. Arya wonders if the person being discussed is the same Lyle she knows. She then questions whether Lyle has come here for her sake and why he would go so far for her, thinking that such actions are far too dangerous. On the other side, the group of adventurers led by Lyle moves steadily toward the mine. Zelfi observes that the surrounding scenery is impressive, while Ralph finds it hard to believe that Lyle and Zelfi have managed to gather more than 200 adventurers in one place. Zelfi explains that the speech Lyle delivers in front of the adventurers is also remarkably compelling to witness. Lyle clarifies that in truth, he is merely following an exaggerated scenario created by his ancestors, and that his real intention is simply to gather anyone he can manage to gather. Rondo comments that a reward of 3 silver coins just for standing around is extremely generous, and he wonders whether Lyle is truly comfortable with doing things this way. Novum points out that what they possess is only the illusion of an army, a force that resembles nothing more than a paper tiger. She doubts that most of these adventurers have ever fought a real battle even once in their lives, and it is precisely this reality that Lyle and Novum have carefully evaluated. Novum explains that all the projected expenses and sales proceeds align perfectly with the calculations made by her specialists. From the very beginning, bandit spies hiding among the adventurers have been sending reports about their activities. Those reports describe the situation as a foolish, glory-hungry noble descendant attempting to involve himself in a bandit suppression effort using only 200 non-combatants and a fully stocked supply caravan. The true purpose of orchestrating this entire performance is to deliver that exact message, a message portraying a lamb willingly offering itself for slaughter. After eliminating Arya's father, the bandits would most likely have fled to a new land, but by using Lyle's gold, this tactic successfully keeps them in place for as long as necessary. According to Novum, they are completely blind to the deception, and every one of them will move exactly as Lyle intends, like puppets bound by invisible strings. In her view, they have underestimated Lyle, but soon they will be choked by that arrogance and regret ever having looked down on him. Slay remarks that Novum clearly holds Lyle in high regard. Basil states that in Lyle's current condition, he could crush those scoundrels even with his eyes closed. Marcus adds that with the techniques they have prepared, the battle is already close to being decided. Basil then asks Lyle to save Arya, saying that this is the only thing he asks of him. Lyle finds himself wondering whether the first-generation head of the family has just sincerely asked for his help. As night falls, the adventurers set up camp near the mine. At some point, a man wakes up and quietly leaves the camp, heading toward the mine. He meets Boris, who asks whether there has been any change in their plans. The man reports that nothing has changed, explaining that the adventurers are all amateurs who have no idea what they are doing. They sleep soundly like infants right in front of the mine entrance and intend to confront the bandits at dawn. Boris laughs at this and remarks that they are easy prey, exactly as expected from a sheltered noble's undertaking. The bandits grow eager and urge Boris to plan a nighttime attack. Boris states that they could slit the adventurers' throats before sunrise. Suddenly, thick smoke pours into the mine tunnels, causing a sharp, stinging sensation. From the scent, Boris deduces that the smoke comes from some kind of medicinal plant, and he reacts with irritation, questioning what kind of nonsense this is. In reality, Rachel and Novum have burned Hakone grass at the mine entrance, releasing irritating substances as the grass burns. Inside the tunnels, the bandits begin to wonder who is responsible for this disruption. Lyle praises Novum and Rachel, seeing that the plan appears to be working. Rondo describes the situation as astonishing and asks whether Lyle can see what is happening inside the mine. Lyle realizes that he now understands why his ancestors needed to wait. When they acquire the first stage of a particular art, it bypasses the usual learning process and instantly forces the user into full mastery. The first stage of the fifth-generation family head allows for the analysis of the surrounding area and presents it as a detailed map. Meanwhile, the first stage of the sixth generation distinguishes allies from enemies and identifies traps. When these arts are used together, Lyle can clearly perceive the movements of the bandits. Basil reminds him that he is able to do all of this because he is also using Basil's full over. Lyle then states that there are 35 bandits in total, matching the information that has already been gathered. He announces that some of them are about to exit the cave and asks Zelfi and Ralph to prepare for an attack, as 4 individuals manage to come out first. When the 4 bandits emerge, Zelfi and Ralph strike them down, resulting in all 4 being killed. Fiennes reminds Lyle not to forget about the mages and to issue clear instructions to them. Lyle then reports that 6 more bandits are about to exit the cave. He orders Novum to prepare her spells and provide support from the rear as soon as they appear, and Novum complies. When Zelfi, Ralph, and Novum are fully prepared, Lyle tells them to wait. He senses that what is about to come out of the cave is fundamentally different, carrying an overwhelming hostile energy, forcing its way forward with raw power and trampling everything in its path. Lyle warns everyone to remain cautious, as there is no doubt that the one about to appear is the enemy leader. Suddenly, the mine entrance explodes outward, and Boris emerges. He declares that Lyle and his companions are unforgivable, expressing his belief that he has been deceived by Lyle and issuing a direct warning toward him. Boris then looks for the foolish, troublesome noble who has been mentioned so often. He swears that he will turn Lyle into nothing more than a bloodstain. Boris then demands that Lyle show himself and labels him a coward for hiding. He formally introduces himself and makes it clear that he intends to end Lyle's life here and now. Basil urges Lyle to step forward, and Lyle complies by revealing himself and calmly presenting who he is to Boris. Boris responds with harsh insults and immediately charges toward Lyle, driven by the intention to make him regret ever standing against him. Boris passes Rondo without a second glance. Rondo realizes that he has no chance of stopping a body as massive as Boris, and he is shocked by the speed at which such a large man is able to move. Boris' axe collides head-on with Lyle's sword, producing a loud, piercing clash of metal. Basil starts to comment again, but Lyle cuts him off, making it clear that idle commentary is unnecessary and that this is the moment for practical advice. Basil tells Lyle to maintain his momentum and lure Boris into the forest. He feels a measure of astonishment at Boris' enormous physique and the sheer size of the axe he wields. Basil explains that fighting in the forest offers far more advantages for Lyle than engaging in an open area, where Boris' raw power can be fully unleashed. Boris enters a frenzy, swinging his axe with overwhelming force and slicing through 2 trees in a single motion. With the physical enhancement granted by the first-generation head of the family, Bora's movements appear slow in Lyle's perception. As long as Lyle can keep up with Bora's motions, he should be able to evade his attacks and find openings to counter. Lyle successfully blocks another strike, and Boras shows clear surprise at this resistance. Boras then slams his axe against Lyle's sword with enough force to knock Lyle to the ground. Basil observes the exchange and acknowledges that Lyle is undeniably skilled, though he also recognizes that ability at this level would still be insufficient to challenge someone like himself. Lyle continues to parry Bora's relentless attacks, maintaining his composure despite the pressure. At the right moment, Lyle retaliates by releasing magic at close range, forcing Boras to retreat several steps. From Rondo's perspective, the sight is astonishing. He cannot help but wonder whether what he is witnessing is truly Lyle's own innate capability, far beyond what he had previously imagined. When they first meet, Rondo sees Lyle as nothing more than an ordinary boy. He even believes that Lyle lacks determination and is unsuitable to be an adventurer. Now, however, Rondo witnesses Lyle matching Bora's blow for blow, refusing to retreat even a single step. Rondo clenches his fist and decides to step in, asking whether Lyle can rely on his sword. Lyle reassures him that there is no need to worry, as he can handle Boras on his own, and asks Rondo to fall back and assist Novum and the rest of the team instead. Rondo expresses doubt that Lyle can win, but after a brief moment, he accepts the decision and urges Lyle to be careful. He understands that his role is to support from the rear and prevent any surprise attacks. Boras feels insulted by Lyle's claim that he can deal with him alone. Enraged, Boras releases his full strength and demands that Lyle stop underestimating him. He labels Lyle an arrogant child and resolves not to let him escape after being humiliated. Boras launches another assault, and Slay notices that Boras' speed increases dramatically, far surpassing his previous movements. Lyle feels that he can still manage these attacks. Every strike from Boras is blocked, leading Boras to question what is wrong with this boy. He senses that he is pouring his full power into each blow, yet Lyle continues to deflect them with the same steady ease as before. Boras then begins to channel his magical power, exploiting Lyle's counterattacks in an attempt to split him in two. Seeing this, Basil advises Lyle to evade rather than block the next strike. Lyle follows the advice and shifts his movement. Basil senses that Boras is setting something up, and soon Boras unleashes a powerful slash that splits several trees apart. Novum and Zelfi both notice the attack. When Novum tries to rush toward Lyle, Zelfi restrains her and insists that she stay back. Novum struggles and demands to be released, but Zelfi holds firm and urges her to calm down. Zelfi observes that Lyle has not lost his will to fight. She questions whether Novum believes she can evade such an invisible attack, pointing out that a single mistake would result in both Novum and Lyle being cut down. Novum admits that she cannot abandon Lyle. Zelfi realizes that this reveals Novum's true feelings, that she does not fully trust Lyle and believes him to be inferior to the bandit in a one-on-one fight. Novum only then becomes aware of her own doubt. She feels remorse, acknowledges that her earlier behavior is unjustifiable, and recognizes that she should never have allowed herself to doubt Lyle. A smile appears on her face as her trust in Lyle becomes absolute. Elsewhere, Fiennes warns that if Lyle attempts to block Bora's attack directly, he will be cut in two. Marcus counters that Lyle possesses exactly the ability needed to handle the situation. Boras observes that Lyle is already covered in blood and declares that the next strike will split him apart. Lyle, however, resolves that there will be no next strike and that this moment marks the end of Bora's path. In an instant, Lyle disappears from sight, shocking Boras as he desperately searches for him. Lyle reappears behind Boras and launches a sudden assault. This movement is empowered by the art of the fourth-generation family head, which grants the user a steady increase in speed. Boras is caught off guard as Lyle circles him relentlessly, moving like a swarm. Lyle attacks from all directions with relentless force, inflicting numerous wounds as his sword cuts into Boras again and again. Novum watches in awe, deeply impressed by Lyle's performance, until Rondo reminds her that her support is still needed elsewhere. Suddenly, Boras increases his muscle mass dramatically. Basil explains that Boras is using an art to forcibly enlarge his muscles and close his wounds. Boras warns Lyle to unleash all of his power if he wishes to survive. Lyle now sees Boras standing in his full power state. Basil explains that Boras is consumed by rage, yet his body cannot endure such an extreme surge of strength, causing his blood vessels to begin rupturing. Basil then realizes that Boris has been using Arya's small gem all along. He urges Lyle to seize that gem. Lyle remains calm, stating that it is unnecessary because he already understands every movement Boris can make. Boris suddenly lands directly in front of Lyle, catching him off guard. Lyle is shocked by the unexpected close-range attack and is violently thrown back. Novum, Zelfi, and Rondo all react in alarm as they see Lyle sent flying.